Hello everyone, I'm the storyteller, and today I'll take you on a spooky story. But don't worry, it will be a gentle and relaxing journey before you drift off to sleep. If you're looking for a tale that's just mysterious enough and gentle enough to relax to, then you've come to the right place. Now, find yourself a comfortable space. Close your eyes and let the story begin. Story 1. Father's Ghost. I never believed in ghosts. Even after my father passed away, I always thought death was the end. No lingering spirits, no vengeful souls crying out in the dead of night. But that was before everything changed. Before that first night came, and I heard the knock at 3 a.m. My name is Emily, 27 years old, and I live alone in a small house in the suburbs of Oregon. The house my mother and I moved into after my father's sudden death. When Mom passed away from a stroke 2 years ago, I was once again the only one left. The house became too quiet, and I thought it would be a peaceful place to continue life. But it seems someone or something didn't agree with that. I still remember that first night clearly. Rain was tapping softly on the roof, and a cold wind whispered through the window cracks. I was deep asleep when I was awakened by 3 knocks. Knock, 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 soft but steady, coming from the front door downstairs. I thought I was dreaming and closed my eyes again. But when the knocking grew louder, I sat up in bed. I tiptoed down the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. The lights in the house were still on. I always kept them that way, because I hated the dark. The oak door stood quietly, shut tight, with no one outside. I peeked through the curtain. Just damp, foggy night. I turned back, about to head upstairs, when something strange happened. The living room light flickered. Once, then twice, then went out completely. I froze. And in that moment, I saw it, a figure in the corner of the room, near the portrait of my father hanging on the wall. I thought I was hallucinating, but the shape was clear. A tall man, standing still, head tilted slightly, as if observing me. His hair, build, even the gray sweater he always wore. It couldn't be anyone else. I screamed and grabbed my phone to turn on the flashlight. The beam swept across. No one was there. But the portrait, it was upside down. That was impossible. I always checked everything before going to bed. The nights that followed only got worse. Every night, at exactly 3 a.m., the knocking returned. First on the front door, then the back, then the kitchen window. One time, I even heard slow footsteps in the attic, where I hadn't set foot since Mom died. I began losing sleep, constantly on edge and terrified. I told my best friend Lily about what was happening. She said I probably needed rest, that it could be stress or some form of anxiety after all the loss. I nodded, but deep down I knew what I was feeling wasn't just exhaustion. Something in this house had changed, so I decided to go up to the attic. The narrow wooden stairs were covered in dust, each step creaking beneath me. The attic was dark, freezing, and smelled of damp wood. I scanned the room with my flashlight. Old cardboard boxes, some toys, books, and a large wooden chest secured with a rusted padlock. I had no idea where that chest came from. I'd never seen it before. That night I searched everywhere for a key. I finally found it in one of Dad's old drawers. When I unlocked the chest, my heart stopped. Inside were my father's belongings. His old watch, a worn leather notebook, some faded photographs, and an unmarked cassette tape. I opened the notebook. It was his journal. The final pages were written in a chaotic scrawl. I see them. They're not human. Emily must know. Don't let it find her. Don't let it near her. I slammed the book shut, heart racing. What was it? I decided to listen to the tape the next morning. I didn't have the courage to do it in the dark. But when I woke up, the chest was gone, without a trace, as if it had never existed. I ran upstairs. The attic was empty. Even the dust was gone, like someone had wiped everything clean overnight. I thought I was going insane. 2 days later, I got a call from an unknown number. A trembling female voice asked, Is this Emily? Yes. Who is this? My name is Angela. I was your father's nurse for a few weeks before he passed. There's something you need to know. I met her that afternoon at a small cafe over 30 miles from my house. She was already there, eyes dark and heavy, like they carried something terrifying. Your father didn't die of heart failure, she said, her voice shaking. I can't keep quiet anymore. He was poisoned. A very strong toxin. Authorities called it a natural poisoning, but I know. I saw. I stared at her, my chest tightening. Who did it? I asked. Angela looked down. Your mother. The air around me turned to ice. I couldn't speak. He wrote everything down, she continued. I think he knew, but there was nothing he could do. And now, I believe his spirit is trying to warn you. That night I didn't sleep. At 3 a.m., the knock came again. But this time I wasn't afraid. I opened the front door, and for the first time, I saw him. My father, standing in the mist, eyes piercing into mine. His mouth opened, but no sound came. Still I knew. He wanted me to go deeper. The question was no longer whether ghosts were real, but what secrets were buried, and whether I had the courage to uncover the past my family desperately tried to hide. I didn't sleep at all that night. After coming face to face with my father's figure right outside my front door, I sat silently in the living room, my hands trembling as I held a silver bracelet he had left on the doorstep. It was the bracelet he used to wear, the birthday gift I gave him when I was 12. I remembered it clearly because I had engraved 4 words inside. Forever my dad. But after his death, that bracelet was buried with him in his coffin. I couldn't explain it. If this was some cruel prank, who would be so heartless? And if it wasn't, how could something buried deep underground return to me? The next morning, I went back to my father's old study. It had been locked for years. I never dared to enter it. Every time I saw that dark wooden door, I'd recall his final glance before being rushed to the hospital. Tired, bitter, and full of unspoken pain, I used an old key I'd found in the toolbox. The door opened with a long, aching creak, like a groan from the past. The room was coated in dust. Sunlight filtered through the sheer curtain, casting long, drifting rays in the air like the ghosts of memories. On the desk sat an old voice recorder, the tape kind, silver and black, its play button nearly worn off. Beside it lay a leather-bound notebook, just like the journal I'd seen in the vanished chest. I sat down and gently pressed the button. The recorder gave a dry click. Then my father's voice came through, low, slow, and filled with despair. If you're hearing this, it means things are worse than I thought. Emily, you must believe me. No one will help you. Not even your mother. His voice broke. A suffocating silence followed. I found the documents, things no one was ever supposed to know. My death wasn't an accident. I saw strangers lurking around the house, unmarked cars, whispers over the phone, and there's something haunting this place. I heard the sound of paper turning, then his whisper, "They're watching me. And if they know I've spoken, they'll come for you too. Don't trust anyone, not even family. In the bottom drawer, you'll find everything." I rushed to the drawer, hands shaking. Inside was a bundle of documents tied with a silver cloth ribbon, along with an old black and white photo of a group of people standing in front of a medical research facility. My father at the center. On the back was a note written in blue ink, Project Orchid, 1991. I had never heard him mention anything called that. Curious, I opened the bundle. Inside were pages of scientific reports, dense data, diagrams of neural cells, test results, and most disturbingly, a list of names marked in red ink. Subject E3, Emily Whitmore, high potential. My heart stopped. My name was on it. I had been part of this research. I didn't understand. My father worked at a small community hospital, not some secret research lab. And yet the files clearly stated subconscious gene testing, post-mortem interpersonal linkage activation, brainwave response near death. Something terrible had happened. And somehow, my father had been involved. That afternoon, I drove to the city library to search for any information about Project Orchid. There was nothing online. But with help from the elderly librarian, I found an old newspaper from 1993. The headline read, "Private medical facility shut down after undisclosed radiation leak." The article mentioned the Westfield Institute, located in a small town near the Washington border, almost 200 miles from where I lived. And at the end of the article was a familiar name, Dr. Nathan Whitmore, last spokesperson before government shutdown. Nathan Whitmore, my father. I no longer knew what I was getting myself into, but the fear was no longer the same. It had shifted into something else, a hunger for the truth. If something had been buried for decades, then now was the time to unearth it. That night I dreamed of my father, not like before. No more silent shadows or cold stares from a distance. This time, he stood in my room, holding the journal, his face full of urgency. He opened his mouth, but no words came, only the sound of a howling wind pouring from his throat. Then he raised his hand, pointing directly at the back of my neck before vanishing. I woke up drenched in sweat, a chilling sensation like someone had truly touched my neck. And then I discovered something truly strange. A small scar at the base of my neck, about the length of a fingertip. I had no memory of ever being injured there. I examined it closely in the mirror, and my heart stopped. The scar wasn't natural. It had the shape of a surgical stitch. I started to wonder, had I unknowingly been a test subject? If so, who did it? And more importantly, why? I told Lily everything. She sat frozen, her face pale. "Do you remember when you had that unexplained high fever as a kid?" Lily asked, her voice shaking. "It was after you slept over at my house. I remember hearing your dad arguing with a strange man outside. I didn't understand much, but I remember your dad yelling, 'She's too young to handle this.' After that, I never saw that man again. I couldn't breathe. Memories I thought were insignificant started piecing themselves together, like fragments of a grotesque puzzle. Maybe I was never truly normal, and maybe my father's death was just the surface of a much deeper secret, one he's been desperately trying to reveal from beyond the grave. I drove through the night, leaving the city behind, heading toward a place the government had once tried to erase from the map. Red Hollow, the town where the Westfield Research Institute was located. Google Maps had no clear directions to get there. I had to rely on an old paper map I borrowed from the library. Its lines faded like long-buried memories lost to time. The further I drove into the countryside, the more desolate everything became. Abandoned houses, broken road signs, cracked pavement covered in creeping vines. As if someone had deliberately tried to wipe this town from existence, I arrived just as the sun was setting. The dying light dipped behind rows of leafless trees, casting an eerie orange glow that stained everything in its path. The Westfield Institute stood like a phantom in the woods, a 3-story building with a caved-in dome and windows boarded shut. On the front doors, scrawled in red paint, were the words, "Do not open, they're still here." I took a deep breath, reminding myself I came for the truth, whatever waited inside. Flashlight in hand, I pushed open the door. The rusted hinges screeched, a long, mournful cry like a scream caught in the throat. The air inside was thick with mold and something far older, something rotten. The hallways were dark, the walls peeling, an old lab scattered with decaying documents, but I knew where I needed to go. The basement. I remembered clearly a handwritten note in my father's documents. Room 13, basement level, where it all began. The stairs to the basement were broken in places. I had to grip an old air duct to help myself down. The deeper I went, the colder it got. My breath turned to fog in the darkness. Finally, I reached the lower level. A rusted steel door, labeled 13, loomed before me. I shined my light through the crack and stopped breathing. Inside was a circular room with bare concrete walls and shattered lab tables. But it wasn't the broken furniture that stunned me. It was the tiny metal beds, child-sized, each one shackled with iron locks. On the walls were medical symbols and dozens of black and white photographs lined up in rows. Children. Their eyes were blank. No names, only codes. E1, E2, E3, E3, me. I recognized my own childhood face in one of the photos. Wide eyes, an empty expression. On the back was a note. Psychic stimulation trial, April 12, 1998. My heart stopped. I looked around, desperate for something to prove my father wasn't behind all of this. I couldn't believe he'd ever be part of something so horrific. In the far corner of the room, I noticed another small door, almost hidden behind a toppled metal cabinet. I forced myself to shove it aside. Behind the door was a smaller, darker room, colder than anywhere else. A plastic-wrapped old video camera sat in the center. I opened it. Inside was a tape. I drove straight home and loaded the tape into the ancient player I'd found in our storage shed. The screen flickered. Then, there he was. My father, much younger, wearing a white lab coat, standing beside a crying child strapped to a metal bed. He looked into the camera and spoke. Day 7 of the Orchid trial. Subject E3 continues to show brainwave responses to sub-16 Hz frequencies. EEG patterns match those of E1 post-mortem. Retesting scheduled tonight. His voice was cold, clinical, as if he didn't know that child was his daughter. I screamed, throwing the remote to the ground. The tape continued. The next scene made me want to vomit. The child, me, convulsing, screaming, while people in white coats stood watching, recording vitals. No one intervened. I had been a lab rat, but then the footage changed. an unmarked section at the end. My father burst into the room, shouting, "Stop! That's my daughter! Stop right now!" The staff pushed him back, but he fought them off, ripping wires from machines. He turned to the camera and shouted, "If anyone finds this tape, don't trust anyone who ever worked at Westfield. We created something that's no longer human." I shut off the player. The room spun around me. Days later, I was being followed. A black SUV began showing up outside my house, sitting for hours, never anyone stepping out. One night, I heard footsteps outside, heavy ones, crunching gravel like military boots. Another time, I found muddy footprints just below my second-floor bedroom window. Lily came to check on me, urging me to leave the city. But as she stepped into my living room, she froze. "Emily, who drew this?" I turned around. A black charcoal symbol had been scrawled on the wall, right where my father's memorial photo hung. It was the same symbol I saw in the Westfield basement lab. I had never drawn it. Someone had been inside, and they left a message. That night I heard my father's voice for the first time. Not through a recorder. In a dream, or at least I thought it was. He sat on my bed, eyes hollow, his face distorted by time and pain. He spoke slowly. "They're coming. You have to leave. Go to the place I marked in the journal, cabin 51, there. You'll know everything." I jolted awake. The room was deathly silent. I was out of time. I left home at 4 a.m., just as the night still clung to the world like a suffocating black blanket. No goodbyes, no heavy luggage, just a small backpack containing my father's journal, a flashlight, and the old pistol my mother once hid beneath the floorboards. Cabin 51 wasn't on any map, no coordinates, no official name. Just a single line scrawled at the bottom of my father's journal. "Off Trail 17, Dry Creek Mountains. Keep walking until the compass stops pointing." Dry Creek lay deep in the northern Oregon mountain range, over 300 miles from my hometown. The area had long been sealed off by the government due to landslide risk and unstable geological activity. But after what I'd seen at Westfield, I knew official reasons were always just a cover. The journey took 2 days, twisting mountain roads eerily quiet, no cell signal, not a single car in sight. At times, I felt like I had slipped into another layer of reality, where time and space no longer obeyed the rules. On the third morning, I began hiking Trail 17. The compass, hanging around my neck, started to spin wildly, the needle twitching like it was resisting something invisible. That's when I knew I was close. After over an hour of trudging through pine woods and bramble, I saw it. A tiny, weathered cabin, standing alone among the thick trees, like it had grown from the earth itself. Carved into the door was a symbol, a circle with 3 diagonal lines. The same one from the Westfield basement and my living room wall. I placed my hand on the door. It was ice cold. It opened silently. No lock, no resistance. No one had lived here in a long time. Inside, the cabin was thick with dust, and yet everything was untouched, books still neatly aligned on the shelves, blankets folded on the bed, the fireplace filled with dry wood, as if someone had prepared for a long winter and vanished. On the table was a VHS tape, placed perfectly, with a small note taped to it. "Emily, you must watch this before they find you." I slid it into the tape player, already connected to an old TV. The screen flickered, then stabilized. My father appeared. Not the composed voice in old recordings, but him in his final days. frail, haunted eyes. If you're here, Emily, it means I failed to protect you from what I helped create. He swallowed hard, eyes glistening. This cabin was once the first test site, even before Westfield. We called it the Link Room. Here, my team and I tried to establish neural connections between humans and entities, not of this world. He paused, looking down. It started as a theory, but then one child never woke up. Though clinically dead, her brain remained active, at a different frequency. We called it the silent threshold. But the girl, she was still there, still watching everything. I shivered. My hand trembled on the remote. After that death, everything spiraled. The other children began hallucinating, talking to no one. And then, on certain nights, the lab doors would fly open. No one entered, but the sounds, laughter, lullabies echoed from the walls. My father raised his eyes to the camera, voice urgent. They called them the returned, children who crossed the silent threshold and came back. But they weren't children anymore, and they remembered what was done to them. The screen went black. I sat in stunned silence. The cabin grew colder, not from the weather, but from something thick, like heavy air turning to syrup. Then, I heard a sound above me. Click, click, something crawling. I stepped into the center of the room, looking up. There was a small attic hatch, and fresh, muddy smudges around it. I didn't want to open it, but something whispered down. A child's voice, very soft. Emily? I froze. You haven't come to see us in a long time. The voice whistled like wind through a drain pipe, dragging out every word like it had been chewed. I reached for the pistol, but my hands trembled too violently to cock it. The attic door creaked open. On its own, something inside had pushed it up. A rope ladder fell down with a thud, dragging a stench so foul it made my stomach churn, like rotting meat soaked in stagnant water. I stepped back, and then it emerged, a small skeletal figure, head cocked sideways, skin pale as wax, eyes pitch black and soulless. It stared at me, lips curling into a grotesque smile. You're late. We missed you. The lights in the cabin flickered and died. I don't remember what happened next. When I woke up, it was morning. The cabin was no longer cold. The ladder was gone. No sign of it. But on the table, where the tape had been, was a new stack of documents, thicker, marked in red. Orchid Phase 2, Target E3. And at the bottom, a note. Activation successful. Subject has begun to see them. I left the cabin in a daze. On the way back, I constantly felt watched, and more than once, I saw them. Tiny figures in the trees, standing between the branches, unmoving, eyes locked on me. They looked just like the children from the photos. Ageless shadows, eyeless. Only their cold laughter echoing through the forest like wind slicing through bone. When I finally returned home, the front door was wide open. Someone had already been inside. I'm not sure how I made it into the house. Everything was a blur. Just a lingering chill down my spine, and the creak of the wooden door as I placed my hand on the knob. The house was darker than usual, even though it was daylight outside. Sunlight no longer filtered through the windows as it once did. The air inside was heavy, thick, like this place was no longer my home. I stepped into the living room, the same place I had once seen the ghostly figure of my father. But now, his memorial photo was gone. In its place was a large mirror not mine, embedded directly into the wooden wall. Dust covered its surface, yet I could still make out my reflection, or something that resembled me. In the mirror, my face was still, but the eyes, they were different, deeper, darker, as if something else was staring back through them. I turned away. Everything in the house was where I'd left it, yet I noticed small, unsettling changes. The framed photos on the shelves, once filled with happy family memories, had all been altered. Same frames, but the people were gone. Just empty landscapes, vacant chairs. I went upstairs, hoping to feel safe again. But the moment I stepped into the bedroom, I saw Lily sitting at the edge of the bed. I gasped, "Lily, how did you get in here?" She didn't answer. Her face was pale, lips bluish, like someone pulled from a river. I stepped closer, reaching out to touch her shoulder. The lights went out. I screamed and fumbled for my phone flashlight. No one was there. Lily was gone, but the faint scent of her perfume lingered in the air. I began to question my own mind. Maybe it was all hallucination. But when I returned to the living room, my phone vibrated. New message from yourself. I opened it. Just one line appeared. "We've awakened Emily." I dropped the phone. My chest heaved. The whispering began. Indistinct voices, broken fragments of sound, like echoes from a drain, from under the floorboards, from behind the door cracks. I grabbed my father's journal, flipping through every page, hoping to find something I'd missed. At the very end, tucked behind the back cover, was a sealed pouch. I tore it open. Inside was an X-ray film. It was my skull. I recognized the scar on the back of my neck, the same location where a small black mass appeared on the film. A spiral-shaped structure embedded between the frontal and parietal lobes. Below the film, written in my father's trembling handwriting, "This thing, it's not part of your body. I can't remove it without killing you. Forgive me." I couldn't breathe. I collapsed to the floor, head spinning. The whispers grew louder, not external anymore. They were inside me. And now I understood. They were talking to each other, through me. Then came the voice, clear, commanding. "Phase transition, link complete. Central cortex access granted." I screamed. I was no longer myself. For the next 3 days, I didn't leave the house. I locked the doors, shut the curtains, turned off every electronic device. But I couldn't hide anymore. On the third night, I dreamed of the children. They stood in rows among the trees, each holding a candle. The flames didn't flicker, even as the wind roared around them. They didn't blink, didn't move, just stared at me. And then, slowly, they chanted my name in unison. "E3, E3, we are hungry." I jolted awake. My bed was soaked with sweat, but something was wrong. On my chest, a symbol had been carved into my skin. A circle with 3 diagonal lines. The edges still bled. I didn't remember doing it. I tried calling Lily, but her number was out of service. I went to her house. The door was sealed, police tape stretched across the front porch. A notice read, "Under investigation, missing person." A neighbor told me she'd vanished 3 days ago. No one saw her leave the house. I knew I was the last person to see her, but was that real? I could no longer tell what was dream and what was real. That night, I decided to find out the truth. I set up a camera in my bedroom, filming myself as I slept. I needed to know what I did while unconscious. The next morning, I reviewed the footage. At first, everything was normal. I lay still, sleeping peacefully. Then, around 3:13 a.m., I sat up, eyes closed. I walked to the desk, opened my father's journal, and pulled out a page. I whispered something, in a language I'd never heard before. Not English, not any human language. It sounded like sobbing mixed with clanging metal. Then I took a knife and carved deeper into my chest, blood dripping onto the floor, and drew the same circle symbol in blood. And then I looked straight at the camera. My eyes were pitch black, and I smiled. The video ended with a whisper echoing from the speakers. The host shell is ready. Next connection, E4. I slammed the laptop shut. My stomach twisted, as if something was crawling inside my gut. I wasn't afraid anymore. All I felt was emptiness, and that emptiness was being filled by thoughts that weren't mine. I knew I was being overtaken, but I also knew a part of my father still lived inside me, in my memories, in what made me human. If there was a way to stop this, it had to start there. I found a folded note tucked into the final page of his journal. Orchid was never shut down. They want to restart it, through you. But I've left you something. My blood. In the hidden wooden compartment beneath my study floor. I pried up the floorboard. In the darkness, my fingers found a small vial labeled Serum Zero, ORK counteragent. I stared at the silver-gray liquid inside, and then, for the last time, I heard my father's voice, clear and warm, like the old days. My daughter, if you can still hear me, then end this. Don't let them take your soul. I clutched the vial tightly in my hand. I sat in front of the mirror, the one someone had placed in my living room, replacing my father's memorial portrait. The small silver vial shimmered under the dim light. The label was smudged by time, but I could still read the words. Serum Zero, ORK counteragent. I didn't know if it was medicine or poison. There were no instructions, no dosage, no guarantees. Only my father's final message. The man who had sacrificed everything to keep me alive. Or rather, to keep me from fully transforming. The face in the mirror stared back at me, but I knew it wasn't entirely mine. In the sickly yellow glow, my eyes occasionally flickered with an inky black sheen. Not from exhaustion or hallucination. I saw movement in my pupils, tiny swirling spirals, like thousands of microscopic eyes watching from within. And every time I stared too long, the reflection began to smile, even though my face stayed perfectly still. I couldn't live like this any longer. That night, I locked every door, turned the gas on, just enough to keep the house warm, but not ignite. I placed the mirror in the bedroom, where it all began. I set the vial on the shelf beside the recovered photo of my father, which I'd found again in the basement. I told myself, if this night is not the end, then at least let it be a beginning, whether for life or death. 2:45 a.m. I heard it again for the first time in days. 3 knocks, steady, familiar, knock, knock, knock. I didn't answer. I sat motionless, staring into the mirror, gripping the vial tightly. Then my bedroom door creaked open. On its own, no one touched it. A cold wind drifted in, carrying the scent of extinguished candles and something else, like burnt hair. Subtle, but nauseating. In the mirror, I stood up first. Not me, but the reflection. It stepped out of the glass, barefoot, its face distorted, mouth stretching to its ears. I didn't move. It approached, head tilted, whispering in a voice made of many voices layered atop each other. We've waited too long, Emily. The path is open. The parasite has rooted. You are ready to become us. I felt my blood heat. My ears rang. I began to hear a pulse. Not my heartbeat, but something pounding inside my skull. Thump, 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 like another heart beating in my brain. I staggered to my feet. My reflection stood inches away, so close we almost touched. I looked up. Its eyes were pitch black, bottomless, pulling me in. I raised the vial, about to smash it on the floor, destroy it, but another hand, my own, grabbed my wrist. I was fighting myself. Amid the dizziness, I heard my father's voice. Not a dream, not a memory, but real, close, whispering into my ear. Inject it into your temple. Hurry, before it fully merges. I reached for the syringe he had left in the same cloth pouch as the vial. The needle was old, but not rusted. I had no other choice. In the mirror, I opened its mouth and screamed, a sound like shattering glass. No! I drove the needle into my left temple. The pain was electric, searing through my skull. I pushed the plunger. The silver liquid surged through my veins, cold as ice. In that instant, I saw everything, as if a door had flung open inside my mind. I saw my father, saw Westfield, saw the nameless children, saw myself, strapped down, screaming in vain, and I saw it. Orke. Not a creature, but a consciousness, a fragment of another reality, sealed away for centuries, feeding on fear, memory, and the subconscious mind. They had no form. They parasitized thought. And I was the perfect host, but my father. He had found a way to break the link, not with force, but with real memory. I woke drenched in sweat. The mirror was still there, but shattered into 100 pieces. In each shard, I saw my eyes. Normal. No black glint. No twisted smile. I looked down at my chest. The carved symbol had faded. Blood remained, but it had dried. On the wall, the sigil once drawn in blood had blurred, as if it had never been there. I walked downstairs, heart still pounding, but it was my heartbeat. In the study, my father's portrait had returned. Someone, or something, had placed it back where it belonged. Beneath it, a small note. My hands trembled as I picked it up and read every word, like swallowing fragments of memory. You did it. Don't let them deceive you again. They'll try, but now you know how to see through them. In the corner, a line in handwriting that wasn't my father's. E4 is lost. E5 is in progress. They're still moving forward. If you're alive, destroy cabin 51. I stood frozen. Outside, rain began to fall. The first heavy rain of the season. Each drop struck the rooftop like a soft drum. But I no longer felt cold. I no longer heard the whispers. I had reclaimed myself, at least for now. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Orke was just a fragment of something far bigger. They didn't need bodies, only to be remembered, and I am the only one who remembers everything. I returned to cabin 51 on a foggy afternoon. A light rain fell, just enough to coat the earth in a damp chill, like sweat rising from the belly of the earth. The forest path leading to the cabin had nearly vanished. Trees had grown over the trail, their branches clawing at my arms like talons. Every step crunched beneath me like rotting bones. But I didn't stop. I was no longer the same Emily, no longer the girl lost between ghosts and truth. I was the last living witness of Project Orchid, the only one to survive the parasitic link of Orchid. And I knew this. If the cabin wasn't destroyed, everything would happen again. Maybe to E5 or to someone else. innocent and unaware. I brought 3 jerry cans of gasoline, a lighter, and my father's notebook. The last thing I kept like a compass for my soul. Each page was his whispered voice from beyond, guiding me like a father guarding the dark. The cabin came into view, still standing, silent and cold as ever. But this time, I didn't go inside. I stood at the threshold, inhaled deeply, then lit a match and tossed it into the first trail of gasoline I had poured along the foundation. The fire caught instantly, devouring the rotted wood like a starving beast. Flames climbed fast, licked along the roof edge, spreading to the windows, the porch, the mold-stained walls that had witnessed decades of inhuman experiments. I thought that would be the end of it. But as the flames reached the cabin's roof, the crying began. At first, it was the sound of an infant, then more, dozens, like a chorus of children buried and forgotten. No one was outside. The cries came from within the cabin. I stood frozen. The fire glowed like daylight, and from its center, a figure emerged, untouched by flame. A child, around 7, wearing a white dress, skin waxy pale, long hair covering her face. I stepped back. She didn't look at me, but I felt her see me. Through flesh, into memory. Every step she took left no mark, yet the grass beneath her withered to gray. Then she spoke. A little girl's voice, soft like wind brushing against glass, but cold enough to raise every hair on my skin. Sister Emily, you burned our home, I stammered, holding my father's journal like a talisman. I didn't want to hurt anyone, but this place, it can't exist anymore. Everything that happened here, it has to end. The child tilted her head, revealing half a torn face. Not from injury, but as if split apart. Beneath her skin were filaments, neural-like circuits, spiraling just like the structures I once saw in my brain scan. We're not human anymore, Emily, but we still remember. We remember your father, his smile, before they took us into the basement. I had no words. Behind her, the fire roared louder, as if the cabin itself writhed in agony. Wood collapsed, walls cracked and fell. Clangs of metal against metal filled the air, like surgical tools clattering, mingled with the screams of children who would never grow up. The girl kept watching me. You lived while we were left behind, between life and death. My chest ached. I'm sorry, I whispered, voice breaking. I didn't know. I didn't remember. It's not your fault. But now, we need you to remember. She stepped forward and gently touched my temple with her small hand. In that moment, I saw everything. I saw myself, at age 5, lying in a hospital bed inside the cabin. My father stood in the corner, struggling with 2 people in lab coats. I heard my screams. I saw my father crying. I saw my body convulsing as a cloudy fluid was injected into me, something I never remembered. I saw the other children, nameless, forgotten, left alone for days, for weeks, in the dark. When their brains stopped reacting to light or sound, they were deemed failed. I saw myself stepping over another child's corpse at age 6 without flinching, because I had been programmed to forget. The flood of memories overwhelmed me. I collapsed. When I woke up, night had fully fallen. The cabin was ashes. Only a charred frame remained. No child, no sound. I sat on the cold ground, surrounded by the ruins of a secret buried for decades. In my hand, though I didn't know how it got there, was a small metal object shaped like a half-sphere, a piece of cranial hardware, etched on its surface, E1, failed connection. Somehow, I had brought part of them back with me, and I knew I couldn't leave that part behind again. I slipped it into my coat pocket and left the forest for the last time. A week later, I visited our family's attorney to open a safe box in my father's name. Inside was a sealed envelope addressed to me, never opened before. Emily, if you're reading this, it means I may have failed. But if you're alive, perhaps you are the last chance to end Orchid. You cannot destroy them with fire, or medicine, or weapons. Only memory, the truths no one dares to remember, can erase them. They exist by being forgotten. Tell the story. Let people remember the names of those children. Let truth speak, because when truth is spoken enough times, the parasite has nowhere left to hide. My hands trembled as I folded the letter, and then I began to write. Not for me, but for the children without names, without faces, with no one left to remember them. Story 2. The Haunting Curse of the Old House. I never believed in ghosts. Seriously, the spooky stories people told around campfires or during Halloween never bothered me. But then, I lived through a real nightmare. We moved into the old house on a crisp early autumn day, just as the leaves were beginning to change in the quiet suburbs of Pennsylvania. The house sat on a winding country road, lined with ancient oak trees. A scene that might have been charming if it hadn't been so eerily silent. 2. Silent. Our family had 4 members. Me, my husband Mark, and our 2 children, Ellie 7 and Tommy 4. We relocated from New York after Mark was hired at a local hospital. City life had become too hectic, and we both wanted a peaceful childhood for the kids. The house was listed for a surprisingly low price, 2/3 of the market value. Back then, I thought we got lucky. Looking back now, it was the perfect trap. The house dated back to the 19th century. 3 floors, a basement, and an unused attic. The previous owner was an elderly woman who died over a decade ago. No one had lived there since, according to the realtor. A home full of character and history, he said. Plenty of charm and potential. On the very first day, I felt something was off. The moment I stepped through the creaking wooden door, I could feel it. An unnatural chill that wasn't from the autumn breeze. It was damp, thick, and smelled like something decaying. I blamed it on the house having sat empty for too long. That afternoon, while unpacking, Ellie ran downstairs with a pale face. She whispered, "Mom, there's someone watching me from the attic." I reassured her. It was probably her imagination. Kids do that. But that night, when I went up to check the attic with a flashlight, I saw it. In the beam of light, on an old dusty mirror, was a small handprint. Tiny, like a child's. I froze. In the days that followed, things started to get strange. I began having vivid dreams. In them, I saw a woman standing in the hallway on the second floor. Her hair hung long and damp, her face blurry as if wrapped in fog. She would whisper something I couldn't understand. I'd wake up gasping for breath, my heart racing. The strange voice still echoing in my ears like it had been squeezed through something tight and suffocating. Mark started forgetting things. Where he left his keys, his email password. One night, he accidentally called Ellie. "Sarah," I asked. "Who's Sarah?" He just stared at me, confused. "I don't know," he said. But the real horror began on the 6th night. Tommy woke up screaming. He cried that an old lady with a burnt face was sitting next to his bed. I rushed in, thinking it was a nightmare, but the smell in his room, I'll never forget it. It was thick, smoky, like the remnants of a fire, long extinguished. I checked the outlets, the walls. There was nothing. The next morning, Ellie refused to eat breakfast. She just stared out the window and said, "She doesn't like us here." "Who?" I asked. "Miss Sarah. She's trapped in the walls." I felt my skin crawl. Sarah, that name again. I began digging through the house's history. In the pile of documents from the purchase, I found the name of the previous owner, Sarah Elizabeth Marrow, born 1930, died 2004. No next of kin. Her body had been discovered in the third-floor bedroom, badly decomposed. Cause of death, undetermined. The police report included one chilling line that made me gag. The body exhibited charring on the face and neck, consistent with self-immolation or post-mortem burning. I couldn't sleep after that. The dreams became longer, clearer. Now I saw Sarah being dragged down the hallway by an invisible force. Slammed into her room, the door shut. Her screams were so vivid, I could still hear them when I woke up. Mark was changing too. He grew distant, quiet. He'd sit alone in the living room, smiling at the wall. One time, I called his name. He turned to me and whispered, "She's still here. Can't you see her?" I took the family to a church. The priest listened to everything I said in silence. Then he murmured, "There are places that carry too much pain, and that pain sinks into the floors, the walls, even the air. It doesn't let go." That night I found Tommy talking to someone in his room. At 2 a.m. I peeked in and saw him sitting on the bed, whispering, "I won't tell Mom. I promise. I'll keep the secret." "Who are you talking to?" I asked. He looked at me like I was a stranger. "I'm talking to Miss Sarah. She told me not to tell you about the basement." The basement. We'd never gone down there. The basement door had been locked since we moved in. Mark once tried to break the lock, but then forgot. That night, I searched the house for the key. I found it, opened the door, and descended the creaky wooden stairs, each step groaning like it carried the voices of the dead. My flashlight lit up a cold stone room, thick with the scent of dried blood and ash. In the corner, a small wooden table. On it, an old photo. A girl, maybe 10, stood beside a woman in a black dress. On the back of the photo, handwritten, "They never left. They stay. Forever." I turned and ran. "I'm writing this as dawn breaks," Mark mumbles in his sleep. Ellie won't stop drawing faces. Twisted, inhuman faces. Tommy sits in the corner, laughing to himself. I know. This is only the beginning. Ever since the night I went down to the basement and found that haunting photo with the chilling words, I hadn't dared to return. But the mere presence of the basement, of that silent secret, seemed to awaken something. The whispers began. At first, they were just faint noises, like wind slipping through the cracks in the walls. Or so I thought. But as night fell and the house settled into silence, the sounds grew clearer. It was a voice, raspy, whispering, steady, like someone telling a story to a listener hidden within the walls. At first, I thought it was just stress, that maybe I was imagining it. But then Mark heard it too. "Do you hear that?" he asked me at 2 a.m., eyes wide as he stared at the ceiling. "It sounds like someone's talking in the walls." We got up and walked down the second-floor hallway, where the whispering seemed loudest. I pressed my ear against the old wooden paneling. My heart nearly stopped. There was knocking, not the sound of bugs. Not rats, but 3 slow, even knocks. Then silence. Then, again, 3 knocks. I whispered, "Is someone in there?" Silence. Then a faint voice, breathy and dry, slipping through the rotting wood. "Don't let it know." I stumbled back, nearly falling. Mark grabbed my arm, his face white as paper. "We have to leave, Lisa. We shouldn't be here." But where could we go? Money, jobs, the kids. Everything tied us to this place. The next morning, Ellie had a high fever. She wouldn't open her eyes. She mumbled Sarah over and over in her sleep. I rushed her to the hospital, but the doctors found nothing wrong. "She's perfectly healthy," one said. "Probably just exhaustion. Maybe some mild emotional stress." Emotional stress? A 7-year-old living in a cursed house? Back home, I noticed something I hadn't before. Every night, the hallway's grandfather clock stopped at exactly 3:17 a.m. Not earlier, not later. I reset it, but the next night it stopped again. 3:17. I started digging through town records at the local library. An elderly librarian named Harold, who'd lived there for over 70 years, furrowed his brow when I mentioned our address. "That house used to belong to the Marrow family," he said, voice trembling. "There was an incident back in 1964. The whole family was killed, except for one survivor, Sarah Marrow. She was 10. She said someone in the wall saved her. The rest were taken by it. But no one believed her. They said she was delusional, trauma-induced psychosis." When I asked more, Harold shook his head. "Some things are best forgotten, miss. That night I crept into Ellie's room at midnight. She was curled up, back turned toward me. I sat beside her and gently placed my hand on her shoulder and touched something cold, stone cold, hard as rock. I turned her over, but it wasn't Ellie. It was a face charred, mouth tight, eyes wide open and staring. I screamed and stumbled backward. The lights cut out. When they came back on, Ellie was there, asleep, soaked in sweat. I wept silently. The next morning, I told Mark. He said nothing, then pointed to the back of my neck. "You, what happened to you?" He took a photo with his phone. There, clear as day, was a burned handprint, blackened and seared into my skin. 5 fingers, branded. That night, the whispers changed. They weren't random anymore. It was a story, fragmented, like a confession. I recorded them, played them back during the day. It was a woman's voice whispering, "They hide in the walls." They didn't know I was still alive. I heard the crying, the screaming, then quiet. Quiet forever. I didn't want to die, but they burned me. I decided to reopen the attic, the place Ellie had once said someone watched her from. The attic was thick with dust. The beams creaked under every step. I found a small wooden door hidden behind old boxes, a crawl space leading into the wall cavity. I squeezed inside. The smell hit me instantly. The stench of decay, old blood and smoke. I gagged. In the flickering beam of my flashlight, I saw charcoal drawings on the inside walls. Burned figures, children torn in half, and a single phrase written again and again. "It's still alive. It never sleeps." I turned to crawl back, and the flashlight died. In the suffocating dark, I heard it. Footsteps, slow, soft, getting closer. I scrambled out, slammed the door shut. It banged 3 times. Then silence. Downstairs, I found Mark in the kitchen, staring at me like I was a stranger. He walked toward me, placed his hands on my shoulders. His eyes were vacant. "She told me, I have to keep you here. You're not allowed to leave." I pushed him away, grabbing the kids. There was only one thought left in my mind. We have to escape. Now, before it takes someone else. But it was already too late. The next morning, when I tried to leave, all the keys were gone. The front door was locked from the outside. The windows wouldn't open. And the hallway clock had stopped again. At 3:17. I had tried everything I could. After realizing we were trapped inside the house, I frantically searched everywhere. Every drawer, every gap beneath the rotting floorboards, even inside the old fireplace. But there was nothing. No keys. No exit. Every door was now sealed, locked by something I couldn't understand. It was as if the house itself didn't want us to leave. Mark sat motionless on the sofa all morning, staring blankly out the window. I shook him, shouted at him, but he didn't respond. Only when I said Sarah did he turn to me, a crooked smile forming on his lips. "She's inside, Lisa," she told me. "We have to stay." We woke it up. A chill ran down my spine. Ellie and Tommy huddled together in the bedroom, silent since the night before. Ellie wouldn't eat or drink. Tommy whispered into the dark corner of the room, repeating the same words over and over. "If I stay quiet, it won't see me. If I stay quiet, it won't see me." I couldn't just sit and wait to die. That afternoon, I tried breaking the kitchen window, the only one that still opened a crack. I grabbed a wooden rolling pin from the drawer and slammed it against the glass. But instead of shattering, it made a deep, hollow thud, like I'd struck solid stone. No crack, no dent. I hit it again and again until my hands bled. But the glass stayed intact, as if it no longer existed in our reality. That night, I tried to soothe the kids, holding them in my arms, pretending everything was okay. But I knew they weren't really asleep. They had learned to fake it because something in the dark was watching them. At 3:17 a.m., the clock stopped again. I awoke to the sound of a lullaby, softly drifting down from upstairs. A woman's voice, hoarse, dreamy, one I'd heard before, in my nightmares. "Hush, little baby, don't say a word. Mama's gonna buy you a mockingbird." I stepped out of the room, not knowing why my feet carried me up the stairs, as if something stronger than fear was pulling me. At the top floor, the lullaby stopped. The hallway stretched long and dark. The door at the end, the room where Sarah was found, was slightly ajar. I pushed it open gently. A freezing gust blew past me, whipping my hair into my face. And in the center of the empty room, a rocking chair was slowly swaying. No one sat in it, but each forward motion let out a soft creak, like a quiet sigh. I couldn't bring myself to enter, but as I turned to leave, I heard a faint scratching noise from the left wall. I crept closer, and then suddenly, an eye, yes, a real human eye, stared out from a narrow crack between the wooden boards. I screamed and fell backward, but the eye didn't blink, didn't move. It only watched, as if the walls were alive. I ran downstairs like a mad woman and scooped up the kids. Mark was still there, but this time he was scratching symbols into the wooden floor with his fingernail. I looked closer. A large circle, strange markings, twisting, ancient. They looked like Latin. He muttered, "It has to be sealed. We must seal it before it takes someone else." I grabbed him. "What? Seal what?" "Mark, please. We need to get out of here." He looked at me, his eyes hollow. Sarah tried, but she failed. Now it's our turn. Despair crashed over me like a wave. But then I remembered the small door in the attic crawl space where I had once heard the footsteps. Maybe, just maybe, it was a way out. A way to escape with the kids. I made a plan. The next morning, while Mark disappeared into the basement, like he had every day lately, I packed a few essentials. Flashlight, bread, water, a small kitchen knife. I led Ellie and Tommy quietly up to the attic, careful not to make a sound. The small wooden door was still there, silent, waiting. I pushed it open, and the three of us crawled inside the narrow wall cavity. The darkness inside was suffocating. It was so cold, it felt like we were stepping inside a corpse. The charcoal drawings were still there, but they looked fresh now, almost redrawn. The dust around them was undisturbed. We crawled through the narrow passage, searching for an exit, a hidden staircase, a door, something. But we reached the end. A wall of stone, ice cold, a dead end. I turned around. Ellie was gone. "Ellie!" I screamed. My voice echoed through the tight space, bouncing back in broken whispers. "Ellie, Ellie, El." Tommy trembled beside me. "Mom?" Miss Sarah said Ellie went with her. She said Ellie would be safe, in the walls. I felt myself unraveling. I threw Tommy on my back and bolted out of the crawl space, back to the bedroom. Mark stood in the hallway. His face was calm, in his hands. The old photo we found in the basement. Sarah, standing next to another little girl. A girl who looked exactly like Ellie. I screamed at Mark, "You know what's happening, don't you?" He nodded. "She's rebuilding her family." I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The house was holding me. That night, the clock didn't stop at 3:17. It stopped at 2:34. And time started moving backward. Time is moving backward. I don't know how else to explain it. But ever since the clock stopped at 2:34 a.m. instead of 3:17, everything in the house has begun to rewind. The dust I had cleaned off reappeared, leaving the floor covered in cobwebs, as if no one had ever touched it. The photo of Sarah and the little girl, the one I burned 2 days ago, was now lying neatly on the kitchen table. Tommy asked me why the bread hadn't been sliced when I swore I had cut it that morning. I checked the calendar on my phone. The screen was blank. No date. No time. Just a single message. "They're coming back." I shut it off, hands shaking. But who was there left to call? Since Ellie vanished into the crawl space in the walls, I haven't heard her laugh or voice again. No footsteps, no crying, just a haunting silence, like the house had swallowed her whole, slowly digesting her soul piece by piece. I haven't told Tommy. He's different now too, quiet. He whispers to the walls and sleeps curled around his pillow, muttering, "Don't let them take me. Don't let them take me." And then I started to doubt Mark. Not in the usual sense. I started to feel that he wasn't Mark anymore. I remember one night, when I was still lucid, sitting in the living room watching him sleep. He lay on the couch, breathing steadily, but his eyes were still open, and they weren't his warm brown eyes anymore. They were milky white, swirling faintly like liquid. I crept closer and gently touched his shoulder, and for one moment, his lips moved. "They chose me. Now it's your turn." I screamed, and Mark jolted awake as if electrocuted. He looked at me, dazed. "What's wrong?" he asked. I was just napping. But I knew then. The real Mark wasn't here anymore. The next day, I went back through the old case file I'd taken from the town library. Inside was a transcript of Sarah Marrow's statement, given to police after her family died in 1964. I'd read it once, but never truly paid attention. Now, each line etched itself into my brain like a curse. I didn't kill them. I only listened to the voices in the wall. It taught me to play hide and seek, but I was the last one left, because I locked the door before they could find me. I turned the page. A section I had skipped, the crime scene layout. And then my body froze. The blueprint of the house I live in didn't match the one from 1964. There was another room once, a ritual chamber, erased from the updated plans. And worse, that was where they found 5 burned skeletons, 3 children, 2 adults, chained in a circle, scorched beyond recognition. Sarah was the only survivor. I understood now. Sarah hadn't been a victim. She was the last piece left behind. The seed of whatever still lived here. I followed the old blueprint to the basement. At the far wall, what I thought was stone was a door sealed under layers of cement. I took a hammer and began chipping away, piece by piece, until the space opened, and the stench of burnt blood hit me like a blow, nearly knocking me out. Inside the tiny low room was a round stone altar. On it, 5 names carved deep into the rock, and in the center, Tommy Clarkson, 2025. I screamed. That was my son's name. This year, now. I searched the altar. The 4 other names. All were previous residents of the house, Sarah's parents, her little brother, and Mark Clarkson. Mark. It made sense now. Mark hadn't been changed by the house. He'd been part of it from the beginning. Maybe he didn't remember. Maybe he'd been influenced long before we moved in. But he brought us here not for a fresh start, but to complete the cycle. I ran. As I reached the top of the basement stairs, the lights went out. Tommy stood in the living room, arms raised, eyes closed, and his voice, not his child's voice, but something older, echoed through the room. "You're not good at hiding, Mom. Sarah said it already. You're the final piece." I cried. I ran to him, held him tightly, shaking him, screaming, "It's me. I'm your mother. I love you. I won't let anyone take you." For a split second, I saw recognition in his eyes. A flash of fear. Then Tommy collapsed. Unconscious, Mark emerged from the shadows. In his hand, Ellie's silver necklace. He let it fall to the floor. Blood dripped with it. "She's pleased," he said, his eyes now fully white. "The new family is complete." I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was instinct or pure desperation. I grabbed the small knife from my pocket and drove it into Mark's chest. He fell without a sound, still smiling, and then silence. No whispers, no footsteps, no lullaby, just me on the floor, holding Tommy, and sunlight breaking through the cracks in the door. The front door was wide open, but I didn't run. I couldn't. While Tommy was still unconscious, and Ellie was still somewhere in the walls. I stood at the threshold, the morning wind tousling my hair. The sun had truly risen, not the dull, artificial light that filled the house, but real sunlight. The front door stood wide open, inviting. I could have stepped out, run far away from this place, and left it all behind. But Ellie was still there, in the walls, in the dark, trapped in the twisted game Sarah created so many years ago. And Tommy still hadn't woken up. I closed the door. The house shivered. The ceiling creaked with sounds like suppressed laughter. I held Tommy, He was still breathing, but his heartbeat was faint and unnatural. I laid him gently on the sofa, covered him with a blanket, and walked upstairs once more. No knife, no flashlight, only Ellie's silver necklace in my fist, the one Mark had dropped on the floor. I returned to the attic. The small door was still there, just as I had last seen it, but this time it wasn't dark beyond. A deep red glow seeped from within, the glow of fire. I crawled in, and the moment I crossed the threshold, I understood. I was no longer in our world. The air was thick, suffocating, the stench of burning flesh, scorched hair, charred skin. The hallway stretched into a labyrinth of stone, its walls slowly shifting, like they were breathing. I heard children's laughter echoing far away, but bouncing from every direction. I shouted, "Ellie, where are you?" Silence. Then from the end of the corridor, a little girl's voice answered. Familiar, but far colder. "To find Ellie, you have to play by the rules." I turned. A girl stood at a junction in the hall. There was no mistaking her. Sarah Marrow, just like in the old photograph. White dress, long black hair veiling half her face. She smiled. A crooked, unsettling smile. "We'll play hide and seek," she said. "You get 3 guesses. If you fail all 3, she tilted her head. You stay here, forever." "And if I win?" I asked. She swayed, her voice like a lullaby. "Then you get Ellie back. But not all of her." Before I could respond, she vanished. The hallway shook, and 3 wooden doors emerged before me. No names, no sounds, only an old clock above them, its hands twitching erratically. I felt pulled to the door on the left. I opened it. Inside, Ellie's bedroom, but completely reversed. Everything hung from the ceiling. It felt like I had stepped into a mirrored nightmare. Someone lay on the bed. I stepped closer, heart pounding. "Ellie?" I whispered. The figure turned. Not Ellie. It was me, but a twisted version, bleeding, scorched, eyes sewn shut. She reached out and gripped my wrist. "You left me. You left me." I tore away, stumbling back out. The door slammed shut behind me. One wrong. The hallway lit up again, and the second door creaked open. This time, the basement, like in my earliest nightmares. But someone else was there. Mark, sitting at the stone altar, writing on the walls in blood. When he looked up, his face was distorted. Hundreds of tiny hands emerging from his cheeks, pulling him into the wall. He grinned. "You still believe Ellie wants to come back?" I said nothing. I knew it was another illusion. I turned to leave, but in the corner, Ellie's doll lay forgotten. I rushed forward and clutched it. Sarah's laughter echoed once more. "Why would she choose the doll instead of you?" The room crumbled. Darkness devoured everything. Too wrong. I collapsed in the hallway. Only one chance left. I closed my eyes. Listened. No crying, no whispers. Only scent, the smell of Ellie's soap, her hair after a bath, the pillows we cuddled under every night. I stood, faced the final door, opened it. Nothing, just an empty room. But inside, Ellie sat with her back to me, facing the wall. Still, silent. I didn't call out. I didn't move closer. I simply sat down and whispered, "I'm sorry. I came a little late, but I'm not leaving without you." A long silence. Then, Ellie turned. Her face, bloody, but hers. Her big, teary eyes shimmering. "Is it really you, Mommy?" she asked, her voice trembling. I nodded. She ran into my arms. Sarah's voice shrieked, echoing, "That's not fair. That's not fair." The room cracked, the wall split. Fire surged from beneath the floor. I held Ellie tightly, screaming, "Don't let go of me. Hold on." Blinding light swallowed everything. I woke up in the living room. Tommy was sitting on the floor playing with blocks. Ellie slept peacefully on the sofa. Mark was gone. The house was quiet. No laughter, no knocks, no whispers. Like the nightmare had ended. I took the kids outside. We stepped through the front door I once closed behind me. Clear skies, a soft breeze. Birds flew overhead. Birds I hadn't seen in days. We left. We didn't look back. But that night, at the motel where we stayed, I found the old family photo in my suitcase. The one from New York. Me, Mark, Ellie and Tommy. And in the center, a small hand rested on my shoulder. A girl's hand. On the back of the photo scrawled in black ink. New family. Still not complete. I thought everything had ended when I took Ellie and Tommy away from that house. I believed that by rescuing her from Sarah's sinister game, by sacrificing Mark's very soul, or whatever had become of him, I had sealed that door forever. But I was wrong. I realized this on the third night at a roadside hotel in a small town. I was sitting by Ellie's bed, gently stroking her hair to help her sleep, when something slipped out from under her pillow. A handwritten letter. I was certain I hadn't placed anything there. The children hadn't left the room. The paper was yellowed, the ink smudged but still legible. You escaped, but the others did not. Do not forget them. Do not forget me. SM. I sat there for hours, my hands trembling as I held the note. My eyes fixed on those last three letters. SM. Sarah Marrow. I tried convincing myself it was a cruel prank. Perhaps someone at the hotel, a nosy staff member who had read old news articles. But what frightened me most wasn't the letter. It was the smell, a familiar scent, faint but unmistakable, the smell of burnt hair. The next morning, I decided to take the children further away, out of Pennsylvania. I told no one, made no announcements. I hastily packed, bundled the kids into the car, and drove 9 hours straight to my sister's house in Indiana. I hadn't shared everything with her, but I needed refuge, and I was too exhausted to explain. The first 3 days were calm. My sister, Vanessa, was overjoyed to see her nieces and nephews. Ellie and Tommy began to return to normal. They ate, laughed, slept well. Ellie even started drawing again. But her drawings kept me awake at night. One depicted the old house, sketched in black pencil, with smoke rising from the attic, and Sarah's face peering through the window, smiling. I asked Ellie, "When did you draw this?" She replied, "I didn't, Mom. She drew it using my hand while I was sleeping." I immediately took all her drawings and burned them in the backyard. That night, Vanessa called me into the kitchen. Her voice quivered. "Lisa, are you sure you didn't bring anyone else?" I was puzzled. She pointed to the security camera footage from outside the house. A video recorded at 2 a.m. In the black and white footage, I saw myself walking out of the house, heading straight to the backyard. But I had no memory of doing so. I was barefoot, in my nightgown, and behind me was a little girl. She clung closely to my back, her head slightly bowed, hair disheveled, obscuring her face. I suddenly felt short of breath. Vanessa asked, "Who is that girl?" I didn't know how to respond. We searched the house, found no signs, no footprints, no open doors. But the silver necklace Ellie wore, the one I retrieved from Mark's hand, was gone. I began researching again. I returned to the city library, this time in Indiana. I sought any information related to the house, the Marrow family, any lingering traces. After hours of searching, I found an old article from 1979 about the ones who stayed, a group of people who had lived in the house before it was abandoned in 2004. One detail froze me. The Wilson family lived in the Marrow house in 1978, leaving after one child disappeared in the night. Before that, she had drawn numerous strange pictures, insisting that someone else is living in the house, but only I can see them. I continued digging and discovered at least 5 other families had lived in the house. All met with tragedy. Missing children, insane husbands, suicidal wives. All records were vague, no lawsuits, no one reclaiming the house. And worse, 3 of them had changed their surname to Clarkson after moving in. Mark Clarkson. That wasn't his real surname. It was the name the house chose for the men who stayed. I understood. The house wasn't just haunted. It replicated, consumed souls, used them as templates to continue the game. My family was just the latest iteration, and I began hearing footsteps at night again. 3 knocks on Tommy's bedroom door, the smell of burnt hair in Ellie's room, the bathroom mirror fogged up every morning, though no one used it, and on it, written with a finger, "We are still not complete." On the 5th night, I woke in the middle of the night to find Ellie missing from her room. I dashed into the hallway and saw her standing before the mirror in her white nightgown, eyes closed. I shook her. Ellie opened her eyes, and the voice that came from her mouth wasn't hers. "Some people never leave, Lisa, because they can't. They are the walls, the floor, the smoke, the wind." I screamed, waking the whole house. Vanessa held me, asking what was happening. I didn't answer. I knew. Sarah hadn't been left behind. She'd followed me. I used to believe that things like spirits, demons, and curses could only exist outside the body. They lingered in walls, in the shadows of basements, or in old houses forgotten by time. But I was wrong. I realized that when Ellie sat across from me the next morning, her expression calm, as if nothing had happened. She nibbled on a piece of toast, occasionally glancing at me with a look I could no longer describe as childlike. I tried to stay calm and asked her gently, "Do you remember last night? Do you know what you said?" Ellie just shrugged. "No, but in my dream I saw Miss Sarah. She said she's inside me. She likes it here because it's warmer than the cold wall." I couldn't respond. My throat went dry. My stomach turned. I had thought I had taken the children away from the nightmare. But it seemed I had brought the nightmare with me. I began researching Sarah again. This time, not through the house, but through her lineage. I wanted to know who her parents were, where they came from, and I found a clue I should have seen long ago. The Marrow family once lived in southern Indiana, not far from where my sister now lived. A small branch of them had changed their name to Merrin after a series of scandals involving occult practices. Some were suspected of performing seances, even child sacrifices. Everything was buried by the authorities due to lack of evidence. But the family's reputation was so ruined that they had to move away. And then I saw a name that made my blood run cold. Margaret Merrin, born 1929, missing. 1944 disappearance location, Wayne County, Indiana Younger. Sister Helen Merrin later married and changed her name to Helen Bennett. Bennett, that was my mother's maiden name. I immediately called her, despite not having spoken in years. She didn't answer. I sent emails, texts, and finally decided to drive to her house in Ohio, about 4 hours away. I left Ellie and Tommy with Vanessa. I knew I shouldn't leave the kids, but I needed to know who I was and what Sarah was to me. When I arrived, my mother had aged considerably. She opened the door, stunned at the sight of me. "Lisa? My God, what's going on? Are you okay?" I stepped inside without any formalities. "Mom, I need to ask you something about our family, about Margaret Merrin." Her face changed instantly. She turned pale, as if all the blood had drained from her. "I don't know anyone by that name." "You do." I looked straight into her eyes. "Margaret was your aunt. And Sarah Marrow. She was Margaret's niece. I've been in that house, Mom. I've seen what Sarah did, and I think something inside me, in our blood, called her back." My mother sank into the chair. She was silent for a long time. Then she began to cry. "We tried to forget Lisa," she whispered. "Margaret, she went missing at 15. But before that, she started hearing voices in the walls. She drew strange pictures, talked to herself. The whole town said she was possessed. Our family moved away to escape the shame. I never thought. After all these years, she handed me a small dusty box. I kept this because I didn't know if you'd ever need it. Inside the box were handwritten letters, pages of journal entries, and an old faded photograph. The photo showed a young girl, about 10 years old, standing between two women. One was Margaret. I recognized her face, but the other, with messy hair and wild eyes, was Sarah. I flipped the photo over. Faint handwriting on the back read, "The first family. No one gets to leave." I left my mother's house that night, my mind spinning. Sarah wasn't just a spirit. She was part of the bloodline. A spiritual parasite passed down through generations, hidden, dormant, waiting for the right time to return. And now, she had chosen Ellie. When I returned to Vanessa's house, I saw police cars outside. I rushed in, heart pounding. Vanessa stood on the porch, her face stricken. "Tommy, he's missing." I collapsed. The police said they had reviewed the footage, and there it was, clear as day. Tommy opened the door himself and walked out into the night. No one followed. No one forced him. But I knew. Tommy didn't leave alone. I ran to check Ellie's room. She was asleep, clutching a toy. An old doll, scorched on one side of its face. Sewn from Ellie's pillow fabric on the doll's forehead, stitched in red thread. Family incomplete. One more. I once thought the worst thing was being trapped in a haunted house. I believed nothing could surpass the horror of hearing my daughter whispering in the voice of the dead. But that night, when Tommy disappeared, I understood. Losing a child to a darkness beyond comprehension. That is true hell. I called his name for hours. The police scoured the neighborhood, searching every bush, every nearby house. But I knew they wouldn't find anything, because Tommy was no longer in this world. My son had been taken back into the loop. The next morning, as everyone withdrew in exhaustion, I sat despondently in Ellie's room. She hadn't awakened yet, clutching the charred doll as if it were a talisman. I wanted to take it away, but something stopped me. Instinct warned, don't touch it unless you're ready to lose more. I opened my phone, revisited the address of the Marrow house, where it all began. Though abandoned, the address remained on local maps. I stared at that red dot. Part of me wanted to erase it from existence. The other part knew I had to return. I asked Vanessa to watch over Ellie, instructing her not to let her leave the house, and said nothing about Tommy. Then I drove, alone, back to the original hell. The house was still there. No signs of police, no caution tape, no warning barriers. As if everything that happened inside had never been recorded. The facade was moss-covered. Grass grew knee-high. The front door was ajar, gaping like an old mouth awaiting a familiar victim. I took a deep breath, then stepped in. The air inside was heavier than I remembered. The house had changed. Peeling walls, partially collapsed ceiling, but the bloodstains on the floor remained. And in the center of the living room, something new. A circle of red charcoal drawn by a child's hand. I knelt down, lightly touched the charcoal, and heard a whisper. "Too late, Mommy. I didn't want to go. But she needs me." Tommy's voice. I rushed upstairs, straight to Ellie's old room. On the walls, the drawings I had burned had reappeared, but this time drawn in blood. Each stroke trembled. Each line screamed. I recognized every image. Ellie, Tommy, me, and even Mark. But in the center was Sarah. Her mouth stretched wide, nearly to her ears. In her hands was a beating heart, a heart with Tommy carved into it. I staggered out, descended to the basement. The stone table where Mark once sat was now covered in moss and dust, but I still smelled fire. I touched the stone surface, chilling to the bone, and red light glowed from beneath the table. I gently bent down, shone my flashlight into the gap under the table. A hidden hatch. I didn't recall this from before. I gently pulled the door. The hinges squealed, then slid down the old iron ladder. The ground beneath was damp, pitch black, and before me was a narrow, deep earthen tunnel. On the tunnel walls, someone had carved the words, "To reclaim the stolen child, sacrifice yourself." I had no idea where I was going, but I kept walking. Each step grew heavier, the air thick like blood. Whispers echoed, many voices, overlapping, as if a crowd of children were crying, laughing, screaming for their mothers. I didn't cry. I only called out, "Tommy, where are you? It's Mommy." No response. Then, after a bend, I saw red light ahead. I cautiously approached. An underground room, small earthen walls, stone floor. In the center was an iron crib. And inside, Tommy. My son sat curled up, eyes closed, back facing me. I rushed over, unlocked the latch, but as my hand touched the crib door, a familiar voice sounded behind me. Again. Every mother wants to steal her child from me. I turned. Sarah stood there, no longer a little girl, no longer with long hair hiding her face, but a tall, gaunt figure, half flesh, half ash, eyes black as coal, mouth full of sharp teeth. In her hand, she held a doll with Tommy's face. "I won't let you take my son," I said, striving to keep my voice steady. Sarah tilted her head. "But your son wants to stay. He needs me. I give him what you never did." Silence. No fear. No pain. Only eternity. I screamed, "He's just a child. He needs family, not to be consumed by your rotten past." Sarah smiled, extending her hand toward me. "Then trade places. You in. He out." I looked at Tommy. My son still hadn't awakened. I knew I couldn't trust Sarah, but I had no other choice. I nodded. Sarah stepped back into the shadows. Tommy slowly opened his eyes. I rushed into the crib, embracing him. A fierce wind swirled around me. I heard Sarah's laughter, then darkness engulfed me. I woke up in the hospital. Vanessa sat beside me, eyes red. "Tommy, he came home alone," she said. "The police found him at your doorstep. He doesn't remember anything." I turned to look around. Ellie was also sleeping by the bed, and I saw my left hand scorched with a long burn, as if it had just been thrust into fire. I tightly grasped Ellie's hand. My heart beat slowly, but steadily. I had saved Tommy, but I had brought Sarah back with me. I didn't die. That was the first thing I thought when I opened my eyes in the hospital. It was strange. After everything I'd been through, the long nights, imprisoned in nightmares, staring death in the face shaped like a scorched little girl, I was still breathing, alive. But that feeling of being alive didn't feel real. It was like waking up inside someone else's body. At first, it was just dizziness. My head throbbed like tiny needles were pricking the base of my skull, especially whenever I tried to remember what had happened in the pit. There was a blank space in my memory, a dark void I couldn't reach. I remembered holding Tommy. I remembered Sarah's eyes. And then, just blackness. Tommy, on the other hand, was different. He woke up without a single scratch. No trauma, no memories. All he could say was that he'd played with the girl with the long hair. And then Mom came, and there was a big white light. I should have been relieved. But minute by minute, I began to feel something shifting inside me. It started with the dreams. I saw myself inside the Marrow house, but I wasn't myself. In the mirror, I had the face of another woman, pale skin, sunken eyes. I saw burning children, blood spattered across the walls, and my own hand holding a match, lighting oil-soaked bed sheets. I woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, my hands trembling as if I really had set the fire. By the third night after being discharged, I looked in the bathroom mirror, and something was wrong. The eyes looking back at me weren't mine. Not completely. There was something deeper, colder, something that knew too much. I reached up to touch my face and froze. The skin at my neck was peeling. Not dry or cracked, but as if another layer was underneath, smoother, thinner, like shedding. I said nothing to Vanessa, nothing to the doctor, nothing to Ellie. I started writing everything down in a journal. Every night, after the kids were asleep, I'd log every change, every dream, every whisper, dragging me back into memories that weren't mine. By the fifth day, I realized I could no longer feel pain. I could dig my nails into my palm until I bled, but all I felt was numbness. And worse were the whispers. At first I thought it was the wind, or maybe stress-induced hallucinations. But when I began to make out words, clear phrases, I knew Sarah hadn't left. "It's time you remember. Remember who your mother once was. You're not Lisa. You're Margaret. You're Sarah. You're the first and the last." I didn't understand. I screamed, "Get out of my head," and threw myself at the mirror, smashing it with my bare hand. Blood sprayed. Shards rained down into the sink, crimson stained. But I felt no pain. I looked into a shard of glass and saw Sarah. She stood behind me, faint, hollow-eyed, but I didn't turn around. I knew if I did, she would stay in me forever. I pressed both hands to my face and whispered, "What do you want?" Her voice slid into my ears like smoke. "I cannot die. I am blood. I am memory. I'm the current flowing through your lineage. You are the door. You are the final piece I need. I decided to leave. I told Vanessa I needed a break. Just a few days. I'd take Ellie and Tommy somewhere quiet. She was worried, but I smiled, said everything would be fine. I wasn't sure if that was true. I rented a small cabin on the edge of the woods near the Ohio border. No phone, no internet, no neighbors. I needed silence to hear her clearly and to find a way to end this. On the first night, Ellie started dreaming strange things. Mom, last night I saw you standing by my bed, but it wasn't you. Your nails were black and your mouth was full of ash. Tommy added, she's still here, Mom. She lives in your blood. But you're not really you anymore. I didn't sleep. I sat in front of a mirror, lit by candlelight, and opened Margaret's journal, the one I had taken from my mother. The last page read, I cannot run. Every generation, one of us is chosen to keep Sarah alive. I wasn't strong enough to resist her, but I hope someone someday will be. If you're reading this, she's already inside you. I knew what I had to do. I stood before the mirror, pulled out the small knife I'd brought from home. My hands trembled. I looked into my eyes, now dulled, faded gray. I won't let you take me, I said. I won't let you move through Ellie or Tommy. I'm the one who ends this. And I cut deep into my palm. The blood poured out, thick, dark red. On the wall, the blood began to move. It shaped itself into jagged words. Blood spills, but soul remains. You cannot escape. I smiled. For the first time in weeks, I truly smiled. But I can trap you. The small cabin, isolated in a dense forest, cut off from any sign of life, now felt like a silent coffin. The only difference was that I, the one lying within, was still alive. But I knew if I didn't end it here, the thing inside me would live forever. When I sliced deeply into my palm, the blood that oozed out wasn't like human blood. It was thick, glistening darkly. And when it touched the wooden floor, it began to move. Somehow, I knew my blood remembered. It knew the path. It knew where to go. And now, it was writing things I had never learned. The cabin walls darkened. Not because the candle light was fading, but because shadows were gathering. It was as though the room itself knew I was about to call forth something even time had struggled to forget. I opened Margaret's old diary once more. The last pages were no longer a confession, but instructions, an ancient ritual, blending the folk rites of ancient Irish people and occult beliefs long extinct since the 18th century. A ritual not meant to expel a spirit, but to imprison it. I had to perform it while my body was still mine. Yet Sarah's soul had begun entering. When the doorway between two worlds opened just a crack, I could force her back. But the price was my memory, all of it. Not just the story of Sarah, but everything that made me Lisa, Tommy, Ellie, Mark, my childhood, first love, my faith, sleepless nights nursing sick kids, even the smell of my mother's baking every Sunday morning. I'd still be alive, but I'd no longer be me. I burned a circle of salt around the room, placed 3 candles, one in front, one behind, one above my head. I cut a lock of my hair, placed it in an iron bowl, and dripped 3 drops of blood onto it. Then I whispered, Sarah Marrow, you're no longer the child in the walls, no longer pain. You're something lost, and I will lock you away. The air grew heavy. Wind blew through tightly closed windows. The candle suddenly went out, leaving only one flickering dimly above my head. Then she arrived, not clearly visible, yet her presence was unmistakable. On my neck, where invisible fingers touched my skin. On my heart, where the rhythm became unfamiliar. On my lips, where another voice tried to whisper through me. "Don't, you and I are one." I screamed, forcing myself to read aloud the final lines in Margaret's diary. My voice broke, each syllable drawn from my blood. "I give you a name, I give you blood, but not consciousness. I close the door. You stay. I forget. You disappear." The cabin shook violently. Wood cracked. Walls splintered. The sky outside turned a dark violet. And from within the cabin wall, a door made of ash appeared. Sarah screamed. It was no longer a little girl's voice, but hundreds, thousands of voices overlapping, as if all the souls she'd consumed were now crying, begging, threatening. But I didn't stop. I walked to the ash door, opening it. There was nothing inside, only a vast, dark void, like the empty space between two halves of a soul. A place without light, without time. I turned back. Sarah emerged, in the mirror, in the floorboards, in my shadow, cast upon the walls. She clung to every image, every hidden corner, her eyes glowing red, her grin stretching from ear to ear. "If you banish me, you'll forget your children, your mother, even yourself. You'll become an empty shell, Lisa. Do you dare?" I clenched my teeth, blood dripping from my lip. But I knew my answer. I had been a mother. I'd lived as a mother. And that was enough. I whispered one final time, "You're not worth the memories of my children." And I stepped into the ash door. I woke on the bare ground outside the cabin. It was morning. I wore an old coat, unsure why. In the pocket was a piece of paper with an address and phone number. No name, no explanation. I couldn't remember who I was. Couldn't remember why I was there. Why my hands were covered in scars. Why my heart raced every time I heard children laughing on the wind. Why tears fell when I saw the image of a girl with pigtails. A police officer found me. They asked my name. I couldn't answer. I just smiled and handed them the paper. And when I turned away, no one saw. On the back of my coat, dried blood spelled out the words, "The door is closed, but the soul never sleeps." Story 3. List of 11 people who must die. My name is Madison Klein. I'm 32 years old, living a fairly ordinary life in suburban Oregon, USA. I'm a night shift nurse at Milwaukee Community Hospital. A place so peaceful, it would be boring if anyone had asked me before all of this began. I live alone in a small house with a white fence, gray tile roof, and a lavender garden in the backyard. Ever since I was young, I've always been rational, clear-headed, a person who never believed in ghosts, the afterlife, or any silly seances. But that was before the voice started echoing inside my head. It wasn't like my inner thoughts, not at all. It was a female voice, deep, haunting, as though someone was standing right behind me, whispering into my ear. The first time I heard it was on a rainy night around 3 a.m. while I was making coffee in the hospital's break room. "He's watching you, Madison. Right behind you. Turn around." I jumped, spinning around instantly. No one was there. The room was empty. Just the sound of coffee dripping slowly from the old machine and the cold, fluorescent lights overhead. I laughed nervously, thinking perhaps I was just exhausted. But I was wrong. Since that day, the voice became more frequent. It knew my name, my work schedule, and even things I tried so hard to forget. like the accident when I was 14, when my little brother drowned while I stood helplessly by, unable to save him. You let him die. I saw it. Just like me, Madison. I was abandoned too. I began to lose sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, the voice returned, whispering things no one should ever hear. Some nights I stayed awake until dawn, curled up in the kitchen with a fruit knife, waiting desperately for daylight. I sought help from a psychiatrist. Diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, I was prescribed antipsychotics. But nothing changed. The voice didn't fade. Instead, it grew stronger. And then, it started giving orders. That Saturday evening, I visited my mother at the nursing home, as usual. She had advanced dementia and hardly recognized me anymore. As I fed her soup, the voice suddenly echoed, colder than ever before. It's time. Free her. Do it now. I froze, my hands trembling uncontrollably. The spoon clattered to the floor. I stared into my mother's empty eyes. And for the first time in years, I felt afraid of myself. I ran away from there, telling no one. I began writing a journal, documenting everything I heard, saw, and felt, but even my own words gradually became unfamiliar. I couldn't remember writing passages like, "She says I have to cleanse, cut off all connections, start again." She? Yes. Gradually I realized the voice had a name. She called herself Eliza, a spirit, or rather something disguised as a spirit, who had died long ago. According to her, she had once been a nurse. At the very hospital I worked, I started researching, digging through hospital records and old archives dating back to the 1950s. And there it was, her real name, Eliza M. Hartfield, head nurse, deceased in 1957 in a mysterious fire in the hospital basement, which once housed the psychiatric ward. Nobody knew why she had been down there at midnight. Eliza's body was found with a horrifying smile frozen on her face. Since then, the basement had been permanently sealed off. But I couldn't resist. One night, I stole the security keys and snuck down. The air was thick with mildew and the lingering scent of ash, as if time had been trapped down there. I found a locked door with a crude warning scrawled in white chalk. "Don't open." I opened it. Inside was an abandoned treatment room. The walls stained yellow, dried blood darkened into deep brown patches. In the center stood a rusted iron chair, leather straps still hanging from the armrests. Above me, the ceiling lights flickered as if ready to explode. I don't clearly remember what happened next. All I know is that when I woke up, I was home, my hands covered in blood, and my phone playing a breaking news report. A patient at the nursing home had been strangled to death. No security cameras had recorded anything. I rushed into the bathroom, staring into the mirror, my eyes. They weren't mine anymore. In that moment, I saw another face, overlapping mine. Not Madison Klein, but Eliza. The first step is complete. Now, it's the other's turn. Those who forgot me. I'm no longer certain what's real and what's hallucination. Since that fateful night, I've been living like a puppet on invisible strings. Eliza no longer just whispers. She laughs, screams, sings lullabies, and even cries inside my head. Every surge of her anger makes my body tremble, my vision darken. As if my own soul is forced into a corner while she takes the driver's seat, I began noticing something horrifying. Every time Eliza became angry, someone around me got hurt. My mother's death was just the beginning. 1 week later, Mr. Travis, my elderly neighbor, a retired policeman who lived alone, was found dead in his garage. A belt tightly wrapped around his neck, his eyes bulging, mouth wide open, as though screaming something just before dying. What chilled me most was that I dreamed of myself standing beside him that night, gripping that belt. And then one evening, while I was sitting in the bathtub trying to relax, Eliza spoke again. But this time, it wasn't a whisper. It was instructions. Clear instructions. The list has begun. 11 people, those who left me to burn alive in the basement that year. Each one must pay. You are my hands, my feet, my vengeance. I jumped out of the bathtub naked, heart racing. I didn't want to hurt anyone. But Eliza, she didn't need my permission. She just needed my existence. The list, 11 people. I had to know who they were. I scoured hospital records, searching anything related to 1957. Call it a strange coincidence if you wish. But I found a yellowed handwritten note tucked into an old file labeled Basement Treatment Team, October 1957. 11 names. Among them, I recognized at least 3 people who were still alive or had relatives living nearby. Dr. Harold Connors, former head of neurology department, missing since 1971, cause unknown. Evelyn Shaw, anesthetic nurse, currently residing at Golden Pines Nursing Home. Mark Duval, technician, his son currently works as a security guard at my hospital. The others, most, had already died. I thought I could stop Eliza if I found the entire list and warned them. But every time I tried, my head pounded as if someone was hammering nails into it. My nose bled, my vision blurred, and Eliza roared, "No warnings. They must suffer. They must feel as I did. Burning, flesh melting off bones. They'll know." I decided to go to Golden Pines Nursing Home. Evelyn Shaw, the only person on the list still alive and able to speak, might have answers. Pretending to be her distant granddaughter, I easily slipped past the staff. Evelyn was lying motionless in her room at the end of the hall, eyes wide open and unblinking. I entered, feeling deeply conflicted. The old woman turned slowly toward me, her lips trembling. "You. Are you Eliza?" I froze. I said nothing, only sat beside her bed. Evelyn gasped, gripping my hand with shaking fingers. We didn't know. No one thought the fire would spread that quickly. They locked her inside the room to calm down. Before that, she was screaming. Said there was a voice in her head, someone controlling her. We thought she was insane. Nobody listened. Her eyes filled with tears, cloudy, yet sincere. I'm so sorry. If she's still here, if she's inside you, tell her that I'm very, very sorry. Suddenly my hands gripped her throat. I didn't want it. I didn't mean it. I had no control. Everything went dark. When I came to, I was sitting in my car, trembling violently, my blouse covered in blood. On the passenger seat, someone had placed a note. 9 people remain. Eliza was enjoying every moment. She didn't just want revenge. She wanted me to become her. I knew I couldn't fight this alone. I needed help, but I couldn't go to the police. They'd locked me away in an asylum. I had only one person left, Noah, my ex-boyfriend, now an investigative journalist in Portland. We'd split after my brother's death, but Noah always believed in the supernatural. He'd investigated mysterious disappearances in the Cascade Mountains and believed in a parallel force existing alongside our world. I called him in the middle of the night. "Madison, why are you calling at this hour?" I need you," Someone, no, something is controlling me. I've done horrible things. A pause. Then, his voice hardened. Tell me where you are. I don't know if I can defeat Eliza, or if I'm only dragging others into my tragedy. But one thing is certain. I'm no longer myself. And the list is still ongoing. No one escapes. They burned me alive. Now it's my turn. I met Noah again the next afternoon in a small cafe tucked away on a quiet street corner. Portland was drenched after a night of rain, the air thick with moisture, and the chill seeped into my bones. Noah hadn't changed much, still tall, calm, his eyes full of skepticism mixed with a trace of compassion. He studied me, as if analyzing every small movement on my face, every blink, every tone in my voice. You look worse than the last time I saw you. I didn't smile. There was nothing left to smile about. I told him everything. Eliza, the voice, the deaths, the list. Each word felt heavy, like stones. Yet somehow, each confession loosened the chains, binding my mind. I expected fear or judgment from Noah, but he just sat back silently, deep in thought. I've heard about something like this before, he said after a moment. It's not an ordinary spirit. It's a parasitic entity, a being that once lived, but after death seeks out the weak or deeply traumatized minds of the living. It survives through control, and its ultimate goal is complete possession. You mean Eliza is trying to turn me into her? Noah nodded slowly. And if she succeeds, Madison won't exist anymore. His words sent chills down my spine. I'd never truly considered that I might cease to exist. Yet perhaps that had already begun, with every action I couldn't control, every death I couldn't prevent. Noah flipped open the notebook he'd brought and placed an image in front of me. A photocopy from an old Latin manuscript written by a monastic order that vanished over 300 years ago. The drawing depicted a woman with two faces, one of light, one dark, staring into a cracked mirror. Underneath, a handwritten note read, "When your reflection in the mirror starts smiling while you cry, you no longer own your soul." That night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror. The dim light illuminated my pale face, sunken eyes, and cracked lips. I began to cry softly, and at that exact moment, I saw my reflection smile. I stepped back, trembling, yet I couldn't look away. The figure in the mirror, Eliza, observed me with cruel amusement. Her mouth moved silently, forming 3 words. Not much longer. I smashed the mirror. Shards sliced into my hand, blood dripping. But I felt no pain. The numbness had spread deep into my soul. I called Noah, begging him to help me perform an exorcism. Part of me didn't believe in such things, but I was out of options. Noah said he knew someone, Father Lucian, a Jesuit priest who had investigated possessions in Romania. We arranged to meet him at an abandoned chapel on the outskirts of Beaverton, nearly an hour's drive from Portland. Inside, the chapel felt like another world. Thick dust-covered wooden pews, shattered stained glass windows littered the floor, and the air felt icy, as though death had lingered there for years. Father Lucian was thin, with silver hair and deep, piercing eyes. He didn't ask my name or my story. He just looked at me and said, "The entity inside you has been here a long time. It doesn't want to leave, but we will try." He began preparations, a crucifix, holy water, salt, and ancient prayers in Latin. I sat in a circle of salt, heart racing, palms sweaty. Noah stood outside the circle, tightly gripping his recorder. Father Lucian began to chant. Within minutes, I was overcome by a wave of nausea. My head spun. The air thickened like rubber. And then, Eliza screamed. Not in my head, out of my mouth. "Don't touch me. This body's mine. She gave me this chance. You're murderers. I'll burn each one of you alive." My eyes rolled back. My body contorted like a cornered animal. Noah rushed forward to restrain me, but was flung away like a doll. I heard his bones crack as he crashed into the church pews. Father Lucian continued chanting louder, faster. My body felt as though it was being torn apart. At that moment, a dark door opened in my mind, and behind it were Eliza's memories. The basement treatment room. Flames, screaming, the sound of the door being locked from the outside, and 11 shadows turning their backs. I understood. Eliza hadn't just been burned alive. She'd been betrayed. Her bitterness had trapped her, turning her into a demon. I screamed. A soul-tearing scream. Everything faded to black. I woke in a hospital bed, an IV in my arm. Noah sat beside me, his arm in a cast, but his eyes firm. He told me I'd been unconscious for 2 days. Father Lucian had died from a stroke shortly after the ritual. And Liza? I didn't know. Everything was silent, too silent. That night, as I lay in the darkness of my hospital room, the dim night light flickering, I saw, in the reflection on the window glass, a shadow standing just outside, unmoving, silent, just smiling. Something had changed since the exorcism. I was still alive. Eliza seemed to have disappeared. For 2 weeks, there was no whispering, no sleepwalking, no more sudden flashes of death in my mind. But silence is never the end. Silence is the beginning of the storm. Noah suggested I leave Portland for a while. He found me a small cabin in the western mountains of Idaho. Isolated, quiet, and cut off from all phone signals or television reception. We believed the only way to weaken Eliza was to separate her from negative energy. The place is filled with memories, with past, with blood. The cabin sat deep in the woods, with no neighbors, just the wind, the trees, and the sounds of nature. The first 3 days passed in absolute silence. I ate little, slept often, and occasionally wrote in my journal. But on the 4th night, I dreamed. A dream so vivid that when I woke, my hands were covered in mud, and muddy footprints soaked with rainwater led from my bed. I dreamed that I opened a rotten wooden door, revealing a dark hallway descending into the deepest parts of the hospital, the burned-out basement. The door wasn't just a dream, it was real. I told Noah about the dream and what I felt. Eliza hadn't left. She was just waiting, hidden, preparing for the right moment. Noah didn't argue, but his face clearly showed worry. He wasn't certain anymore that we could defeat her. He returned to Portland, continuing his search for clues about Eliza. Records, diaries, anything explaining why her spirit was so powerful. I stayed alone in Idaho, monitoring every subtle shift in my mind, like someone dying from an unnamed illness. On the 7th day, I opened a kitchen drawer and discovered a neatly folded note, dry and fresh. I swore I hadn't put it there. On the paper was a scrawled message in red ink. They all opened the door. Now it's your turn. I threw the note into the fire. But that night, as I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, I saw a door opening behind me. Though no such door existed in that room, I couldn't hide anymore. Eliza wasn't merely a vengeful spirit. She was part of something larger, older, as if the basement where she died was just one of countless gateways connecting this world to somewhere deeper, darker. The next morning, I received a text from Noah. Found a copy of Eliza's autopsy report. Something's very strange. Her body wasn't fully burned. Her skull was crushed, chest shattered from the inside. Someone beat her to death before the fire ever reached her. I stood still for hours after reading that. The fire wasn't the cause of her death. Someone had murdered her first. The flames were just a cover-up. Now I understood her hatred. It wasn't simply being burned alive. It was betrayal, torture, and being buried alive beneath fire. I had to return to where everything began. I drove back to Milwaukee Hospital on a night of pouring rain. The basement was still sealed, but I knew the old entrance behind the records room. Walls damp with mold, moss spreading like disease. My flashlight flickered like dancing ghosts. At the bottom stood the cold metal door with faded words. "Do not open." I opened it. Inside was the old treatment room, exactly as I remembered. But this time, I wasn't an observer. I was part of it. A shadow formed in the corner, blurry except for its fiery eyes. Eliza. She didn't scream or shout. She simply stared at me with pity. They locked me up. They laughed when I begged. They called me insane. But I was only someone who heard voices, like you. I stumbled backward, stunned. "I never wanted to kill you, Madison. I wanted you to understand. This world doesn't heal the weak. They burn us, but we survive." I don't know what compelled me to reach out and touch her hand, but when I did, everything went dark. I saw memories that weren't mine. A young girl locked in a monastery basement, forced to pray until her hands bled. A teenage girl branded a witch for hearing voices. A nurse manipulated by doctors, framed and discarded like garbage. Now I understood. Eliza wasn't one. She was a collection of all the souls abandoned, labeled insane, cast into humanity's darkest pits. And now, they had chosen me as their final vessel. I screamed, pulled a knife from my pocket, and sliced deeply into my arm. Blood gushed, making Eliza stagger. I ran, stumbling back upstairs, but the flashlight was dead. Thick darkness surrounded me. Her voice echoed from every wall. "You can't escape. No one escapes the open door." I woke up in the emergency room, arm bandaged. Doctors said security found me unconscious in the basement. No one believed me when I said I'd been possessed. Noah sat by my side, eyes filled with sadness and disappointment. "Madison, do you think you finally escaped her?" I didn't reply, because I wasn't sure. But when I glanced into the mirror on the hospital wall, I saw Eliza standing behind Noah. And this time, she wasn't smiling. No one believed me. Not the doctors, not the nurses, not even Noah. At least, not since the last time he saw me collapsed in the Milwaukee hospital basement with a deep gash in my arm and a blood-stained knife in my hand. They thought I was self-destructing, that I needed to be kept under watch for my own protection. Everyone who spoke to me used the gentle tone usually reserved for the insane. But none of them understood. I wasn't afraid of dying. I was afraid of losing myself, because I felt it more clearly each day. Eliza no longer waited for the night to invade. She lurked behind every glance, every choke and sob in my throat, every unfinished dream I couldn't remember having lived or not. I began to see things I was certain no one else saw. Shaky words appeared on the walls of my hospital room, only visible when I turned away. Shadows flickered at the corners of my eyes, moving too fast to define. Footsteps circled my bed every night, but when I turned on the lights, no one was there. Noah still visited, but he spoke less each time. His gaze grew heavy, as though he was watching me slowly become someone he no longer recognized. One afternoon, he arrived carrying a stack of old documents, the final piece of his investigation. Madison, listen. We were wrong to think Eliza was the center of everything. I looked up, feeling frozen. What do you mean? He placed the documents in front of me. An old, faded, typewritten title read clearly, The Whisper Project, Oregon State Hospital, 1954-1957. This was a secret experimental program led by doctors and psychologists. They believed they could access the deep subconscious by making contact with lingering spirits, using psychiatric patients as vessels. I shivered. Fragments from my dreams, locked rooms, restraints, streaming, began piecing themselves together. Eliza wasn't just a victim. She was part of the project, a medical supervisor. But something went wrong. One of the test subjects, called Subject 11, awakened, and everything spiraled out of control. Noah flipped to the last page, a photograph of an old map. On it, the basement I'd previously entered was just part of a much larger underground complex. There's a hidden chamber beneath. That's where Subject 11 was held. After the fire, the area was sealed off and erased from maps, but it's still there. He pointed to a small notation on the edge of the map. The final door. I think, if we find that room, we might discover what really happened. And more importantly, we might find a way to end it. I wasn't sure if this was an opportunity or a trap, but I knew I had no other choice. I agreed. That night we slipped into the hospital through a back door, an old route security guards still used for sneaking cigarettes. Equipped with flashlights, rope, and the map, we navigated a narrow corridor down to the basement. No voices, no strange phenomena. Until the final metal door appeared before us, rusted, handleless, with only an old-fashioned lock. Noah pried it open with a crowbar. The door groaned mournfully, releasing a blast of icy air that cut through us. The room inside was pitch black. We stepped in. Beyond the threshold was a long hallway lined with small rooms, each with one-way glass, like interrogation chambers or medical containment cells. But what took my breath away was the sound, not clear, not loud, just whispers, dozens, maybe hundreds, from everywhere. I collapsed, overwhelmed, clutching my head, nails digging into my skin to make the noise stop. Madison, don't let them in. Don't open your eyes. Noah's voice. But I couldn't help myself. When I opened my eyes, I was standing in the treatment room, back in 1957. Everything was intact. Doctors in white coats, patients trembling in the corners, and at the center, Eliza, younger, healthier, crying, screaming. We shouldn't continue. It's not just voices anymore. It's something else. A man stepped forward. I recognized him from the photos. Dr. Harold Connors, the project leader. We've gone too far to stop, Eliza. You've heard it too. It called your name. Eliza backed away, but they grabbed her, injected her, strapped her down. And then I saw the door opening behind them. Something emerged, not human, not spirit. Just an indescribable presence of horror, everything blurred. I woke up on the cold floor, Noah shaking me awake. In his hands was a torn notebook labeled The Final Entry. Eliza M. Hartfield. Inside were the last words she'd written before she died. Subject 11 is not just here. It's the thing that speaks to me. It promised I would be remembered. I let it into my mind. Now I'm no longer alone. Now, we are one. Eliza wasn't just a spirit. She was the final doorway, the portal into something older and darker than anything human minds could comprehend. And I might have opened it. I can't breathe anymore. After everything I've endured, the voices in my head, the deaths, the failed exorcism, the memories that weren't mine, I'm now facing the truth. Eliza isn't alone. More importantly, she's not the center of this darkness. Subject 11 is. In the final diary entry from Eliza that Noah found in the hidden chamber, the words scrawled desperately carried a terror that surpassed even death. Eliza had stopped being herself long before she was killed. I no longer believe the voices belong to the dead. I'm no longer helping anyone. Subject 11 isn't a victim, it's the well, and we've drawn something uncontrollable from it. Noah flipped through the final pages. In them, Eliza described a recurring nightmare, being dragged down a deep well, and at the bottom was a shapeless being, darkness itself, alive, speaking, manipulating. I trembled, because that was exactly my dream. Last night, since entering the hidden chamber, I've stopped hearing Eliza, but that doesn't bring relief, because I sense something else has replaced her. Stillness. Stillness like the quiet before a storm. I fell asleep in Noah's apartment. When I opened my eyes, everything was pitch black. No lights, no city sounds. Stumbling toward the balcony, my heart stopped at the sight before me. All of Portland was plunged into darkness. The city was drained of all light, consumed by dense blackness. No electricity, no cars, no signs of life. But in the sky, something watched. A red streak like a bleeding eye slowly opening. And inside my head, an unfamiliar voice, colder than steel, heavier than hell, spoke clearly. You were not chosen. We were waiting for you. You opened, we crossed. I woke up violently, soaked in sweat. The electricity was still on. Portland was still alive, but I knew. It wasn't a dream, it was a warning. Noah and I returned to Milwaukee Hospital the following morning. We had to find Subject 11's room, perhaps an isolation chamber, a containment cell, or even a crypt. Every file about the Whisper Project ended in the basement. But something was overlooked. At the end of the old hospital map, a faint line led to an area never mentioned. Room 0. No number, no name, just a room no one dared to open. We found it easily, a wooden door with an iron padlock. Noah pried it open with his crowbar. The door swung inward, releasing a rush of air. Not merely cold, but deathly. Room 0 was empty, no furniture, no signs of occupancy. Just a circular hole in the center of the floor, about a meter wide, sealed by a heavy black iron lid, thick with dust. Noah aimed his flashlight at the lid. Words were etched into the iron. S11, do not open. Ever. We stood frozen. My heartbeat became erratic, my hands shaking uncontrollably. Eliza had been the gateway, but Subject 11 was what waited beyond. And now, it lay beneath my feet. Noah took out his camera, documenting everything. When the flash went off, I saw someone standing behind him. No one else was there. Yet clearly, in that split second of bright light, I saw a tall figure, faceless, just an endless void of darkness. I screamed. Noah spun around, saw nothing. Then from beneath the iron lid, A knock echoed. One knock, then two, then three. Not metal hitting metal, but bone striking stone. I ran. Noah followed. We never looked back. Back in the apartment, I turned on every light, locked every door, and desperately flipped through Eliza's diary once more. A page had been torn out, hidden carefully between the last page and the hardcover. On it was a circular symbol, 11 intersecting lines radiating like spokes, centered around a deep black dot. Below, a brief incantation. Once its eye opens, every door leads to it. That night I sleepwalked again. Noah found me standing in front of the bathroom mirror, unblinking, lips moving silently. He filmed it and showed me the next morning. I couldn't believe it. I was speaking in Eliza's voice. Subject 11 never died. We are its continuation. We are its new body, its new voice. We are victims, and the ones who open the way. I panicked, scratching myself, banging my head against the wall. I needed to close the gate. But how do you close a door you never intended to open? How do you silence a voice that has become part of your own mind? At exactly 3:13 a.m., I woke to knocking. Not at the door, but beneath the floor, directly beneath my bed. 3 sharp knocks. I didn't dare move. Carefully reaching for my phone, I opened the Notes app and rapidly typed, "If anyone finds this journal, destroy room ZEO. Never open the well." Subject 11 isn't just an entity. It's the source, the first voice. And I think I'm becoming it. I once thought Eliza was the limit of this nightmare. I was wrong. She was just the shadow of a much larger darkness. A mindless guide turned puppet by a rage with no shape, no name, no memories like ours. Yet it remembered every fear, every fracture in the human mind. That thing, Subject 11, didn't need a physical body. It thrived on our memories, and I'd given it far too many. After that night, I was no longer sure if I controlled my own thoughts. I started talking in my sleep, scribbling strange symbols on walls, mirrors, even onto my own skin. Noah stayed awake every night to watch me. But I saw his eyes change. He no longer believed he was speaking to his former girlfriend. He was talking to something else, slowly awakening, disguised as someone named Madison Klein. I didn't blame him. I wasn't sure who I was anymore. I began having memories that weren't mine. I saw myself standing in a long hallway, its walls whitewashed, heavy with the scent of antiseptics. Rats scurried over my feet, accustomed to the death trapped within these walls. I saw myself dressed in a white medical coat, scribbling notes into a patient file in Eliza's handwriting. My mind filled with whispers in Latin, German, and languages I'd never heard before. I watched as Eliza was dragged screaming across the floor, blood pouring from her nose, ears, and eyes. And the figure standing over her wasn't a doctor or a guard, but a faceless being, its skin stretched tight and glossy, like wax paper across the skull. I felt the sensation of dying while still alive. These weren't dreams. They were memories. I was reliving Eliza's past and those who had come before her. Noah took me to meet a man named Jonah Redfield, an expert in ancient occult phenomena. Jonah lived secluded in a weathered cabin near Crescent Lake, Washington, a place infamous for mysterious disappearances attributed to an unnamed darkness. He wasn't surprised when he heard the name Subject 11. It's not just one entity, he explained. It's a pattern. The number 11 appears repeatedly across many ancient civilizations. In Kabbalah, 11 symbolizes the fracture between order and chaos. In Norse mythology, it's connected to Helheim, the land of forgotten souls. I remained silent. Jonah lit a cigarette, his eyes clouded behind a haze of smoke. Do you know why it chose you, Madison? Because you carry the fractures within. Loss, guilt, self-hatred. Subject 11 doesn't invade. It merges. I clenched my fists until they bled. I didn't want to be a vessel for such a thing. I wanted it gone. Jonah said there was only one way, to return it to its source. Not a room, not a basement, but the well Eliza had described in her diary. The pit where they'd experimented in communicating with an unbound consciousness, buried deep beneath the old hospital grounds, below the original foundation. Untouched since 1957. 3 nights later, we returned. It was 1:34 a.m. The city was quiet, but unusually foggy. Milwaukee Hospital had temporarily closed due to electrical malfunctions, an excuse covering 3 days of unexplained blackouts in the area. We went to the basement, then further down, reaching a place untouched for 70 years. A concrete slab blocked our path, but Noah and Jonah smashed through it, revealing a dark, circular well with a winding staircase descending into the earth. Jonah pressed something into my hand, a small iron box containing holy salt, earth from a sacred Romanian graveyard, and a coil of red thread. If you're truly still yourself, he said gravely, recite the words I taught you when you reach the bottom. If not, run and never look back. I descended step by step. The air grew razor cold. The whispers grew louder. Not one voice, but thousands. They spoke backward. They sang. They laughed. At the bottom, I saw it. Subject 11. A mass of floating darkness, shapeless, absorbing all light, yet clearly seeing through every cell in my body. And suddenly, I recognized it. It was me. Or rather, the part of me I'd always denied. The child who stood silently as her brother drowned. The girl who abandoned her mother in her final hours. The woman who carried the voices of the dead for a decade. I bit my tongue until blood filled my mouth, then recited Jonah's incantation. In nomine veritatis, claudo ostium, claudo memoriam, claudo me. Light flashed like an explosion. I couldn't hear anything, couldn't see anything. I woke up in the hospital. Noah slept beside my bed. Jonah was nowhere to be found. They said I'd been discovered unconscious in an abandoned lot behind the hospital. Alone. No one mentioned Subject 11. No one mentioned Eliza. But I knew something had changed. I no longer heard voices, no longer saw shadows in the mirror. Yet each night, before I sleep, I look into my reflection's eyes, and sometimes, just for a fleeting moment, I see eyes that aren't mine. And then, I smile. It's been 11 days since the night I went down into the well, and I'm still alive. I still breathe, still speak, still walk with my own legs. I eat, sleep, laugh, but everything feels remotely controlled, as if I'm a puppet learning to pretend to be human. I don't hear voices anymore. Subject 11 no longer whispers in my head, but that's precisely what scares me the most. No sounds, no hallucinations, nothing at all. Just absolute silence, quiet like a pit, like the vacuum after a gunshot, like the dense air before an earthquake. Noah is still by my side. He still cares for me, still says gentle things like, "We made it through. You won." But I know he sees it. He sees it clearly, those times when I stand for hours in front of the mirror. The moments I suddenly burst into laughter in the middle of the night, even though nothing's funny. The dreams I can't recall, yet they leave small circular bloodstains on the sheets, exactly like experimental symbols. I haven't told him about what I see when I look into the mirror. That face. Not mine. Not anymore. One night, when Noah went out to buy medication, I was alone in the living room, the television screen reflecting streetlights from outside. And I saw it, a figure standing right behind the sofa. Unclear, unmoving, but I knew it was watching me. I turned around. Nothing was there. I looked back at the screen. It was still there. But this time I wasn't afraid. I just nodded, and it nodded back. I've started writing a new journal. Unlike the old one, filled with blood, tears, and fear, this one is clean, organized. I write down every dream, every thought, every emotion I know isn't mine. I write about things I never knew, but now remember as if I've lived for centuries. Ancient languages, strange symbols, names I've never heard, but when spoken, make my heart pound as if I'm calling myself. One of those names is Azul. I don't know what it means, but when I say it silently, the mirror starts to crack. Noah began to suspect. He read my journal secretly. I knew. I let him read. That night he woke me up at almost 2 a.m., his eyes bloodshot. You need to tell me. What did you bring back from that well? I sat up, looking at him slowly. I didn't bring it back. I left it here, inside me. He stepped back, looking at me like a wild animal. I didn't blame him, because that was when I realized. I no longer felt sadness. No anger, no emotions at all. Feelings, the last thing that made me human, had been devoured by Subject 11. 3 days later, Jonah Redfield disappeared. Police found his cabin ransacked, small traces of blood inside, and the ancient book he'd been studying torn apart, pages scattered around Crescent Lake. Jonah was nowhere to be found. Only one strange object remained. A cracked mirror placed neatly in the center of the room. I knew it was a warning. Subject 11 didn't want anyone else to know about it. I began drawing. Not with a pen, with my fingernails. On walls, on floors, on my skin, concentric circles, lidless eyes, symbols I didn't understand yet drew perfectly. One night, I dreamed I stood on the rooftop of Milwaukee Hospital, covered in blood, under a blood-red moon. Below me, hundreds of faceless people stared upward, silent, empty vessels, listening to my voice. I screamed, in the voice of Azul, and they kneeled. Noah tried to convince me to seek treatment. But how do you treat something that doesn't exist medically? A name, a voice, a forgotten memory can't be surgically removed like a tumor. You can't swallow pills and expect it to disappear. It is me now. I let Noah go. He didn't argue. He just looked at me one last time with profound sadness, as if witnessing my death, yet knowing no one in this world could save me. Tonight, I sit writing these words. I've ripped the mirror from the wall, hung it directly in front of me, sitting opposite, staring, and I wait. I wait until my face blurs, melts, then reforms. No longer Madison Klein, but the final face. If someone is reading this, if anyone still remembers me, never trust silence. The voice never disappears. It's only waiting until you're weakest to whisper, I am you. Story 4. The Phantom of the Bloodstained Stage. I don't know if I'm just too sensitive, or if what people always joke about is true, that I've been chosen by something. But I swear to God, that theater, it's not normal. My name is Emily Gray, a 24-year-old stage actress. I moved to New York less than a year ago to chase my dream of becoming a performer. Like many others, I thought I'd start with forgettable side roles on tiny stages, slowly working my way up if I got lucky. But during my very first week in the city, I got a call from director Michael LaRue. Not a household name, but respected enough to get the theater community's attention. He was reviving a classic play called Lady of the Lake, and what made it even more intriguing was where he planned to stage it, right where the play first debuted back in 1950. The old Orpheum Theatre, a place long rumored to be cursed after an infamous murder that was never solved. They say the lead actress, Margot Bellamy, vanished during the final scene of the original performance. She was supposed to walk into a lake on stage, searching for her lost love. But after that night, she disappeared. No one, not her co-stars, not the director, not the theater staff, ever saw her again. Some believe she ran away under pressure. Others think she was murdered and her body hidden somewhere in the theater. I never believed in ghost stories. Not until I stepped onto that stage. The Orpheum Theatre is wedged between two modern office buildings, like time itself forgot it. Its exterior is cracked, moss-covered and weathered, but inside was something else entirely. Vaulted ceilings adorned with hand-painted frescoes, marble statues lining the corridors, and pale yellow lights filtering through ancient chandeliers. It was like being trapped in a forgotten era. The audition took place on a gloomy Tuesday afternoon. Rain trickled down outside. Thunder rumbled in the distance. It felt like an omen, but I brushed it off. That is, until I stepped into the waiting room and felt a sharp chill creep down my spine. Even though the heater was on, there was a corner in the room that everyone avoided. An old leather chair sat there, its backrest torn, the seams fraying like open wounds. No one went near it, not even me. I didn't know why. I just knew. "Well done, Emily," Michael said after my monologue. "You are the Margot I've been looking for." I wasn't sure if I should be happy or afraid. The first few days of rehearsal went smoothly. I began getting to know the cast, each one hiding their own secrets. Jack, the male lead, was a seasoned actor, quiet and reserved. Gwen, the costume designer, often whispered to herself in the dressing room, and Lucas, the lighting technician, kept talking about strange noises from the top floor, the one no one was allowed to enter after 6 p.m. The first night I rehearsed alone on the stage, after everyone had left, was when things began to go wrong. I stood in the center of the stage, reciting the final lines. Margot's descent into the lake, calling out for her lost love. That's when I heard it. Water, flowing. Not from the sound system, it was real. I paused. The stage was dry. There was no lake, no water, but I still heard it. A soft trickling sound, like droplets falling from the ceiling onto wood. I crouched down. Nothing. And then I saw it. A reflection in the glass of the props room. Backstage, a woman in a white dress, hair covering her face, back turned toward me. I screamed and spun around. No one was there. After that night, everything spiraled out of control. One day, Gwen was helping me with costumes when she found a dried blood stain inside the dress. Just a small spot, but clear. The dress had been freshly laundered the day before. No one had touched it. Lucas started ranting about a girl in the third-floor hallway, someone who whispered to him when he walked alone at night. He quit 2 days later without saying goodbye. The lights he left behind, kept flickering like some kind of trap. Jack, the lead actor, began having nightmares. He said that during the final scene in his dreams, a cold hand gripped his throat and he couldn't move. 1 week before opening night, during a rehearsal of Margot's descent into the lake, the center of the stage collapsed. I was less than a meter from the edge. Beneath the broken floorboards was water, and floating in that black pool, a white dress. The production was temporarily halted, but I couldn't sleep. Every night, I dreamed I was standing beneath the stage, where no spotlight reached, and someone whispered in my ear, "They've had their turn. Now it's yours." I started digging through old case files, faded articles, anything I could find about the 1950 incident. Margot Bellamy wasn't the only victim. Within 2 weeks of her disappearance, 3 other members of the original cast died in strange accidents. One fell from the lighting rig. One was electrocuted by stage equipment. The last drowned in a hotel bathtub. No one ever connected the dots. No one, except me. Because now, the accidents are happening again. One by one. And I'm starting to understand. Margot never left that stage. She's been waiting for someone to relive her story. One more time. I used to think the wings were the safest place in a theater. That space was dark, cramped, echoing with the sound of props being set up, and dimly lit just enough so no one would trip. But that very void of darkness, that dead corner between the stage and backstage, was where I saw her. The woman in the white dress, her hair covering her face. The second time, this time, she stood still. No turning, no movement. I remember freezing in place, the script trembling in my hands. Not a sound around me except my own footsteps and the dry, frantic breath caught in my throat. The stage lights had been turned off 20 minutes earlier. The cast had gone home. I was the only one left in the theater, or so I thought. But she was still there. I took a step back. My heart pounded wildly. And then, like a wave of cold air slicing through my skin, the emergency light flickered on in the distance. For a split second, I saw it clearly. Her face. The lower half was decayed. I ran off that pitch-dark stage, not caring about my bag, my phone, or anything else. As I burst through the main doors, the sound of a steel lock snapping shut behind me nearly made my knees give out. No one believed me. Not because they didn't want to, but because what I said sounded like the ramblings of a madwoman. The next morning, I returned to retrieve my belongings. Director Michael was waiting, looking more serious than usual. "Emily, there's something I need to tell you," he said, guiding me into a private office above the balcony on the second floor. I had never noticed that room before. A deep red door, a thin layer of dust on the handle. Michael unlocked it with an old-fashioned key, then led me inside without turning on the light. There was nothing in the room but a desk, a few stacks of old scripts, and a small wooden box draped in black velvet. "This is the original script of Lady of the Lake," he said in a near whisper. Handwritten by the director in 1950, Henry Beaumont. It was never published, and I've never let anyone read it. I looked at him confused. "Why are you showing it to me?" "Because I think you're seeing something the rest of us can't." I opened the box. Inside was a stack of brittle papers, the edges singed and stained with watermarks. The ink had smudged on the first few pages, but further in, The writing became clearer. The lines didn't match the script we were performing. There were scenes never mentioned before, where the main character, Margot, didn't die by suicide, but was dragged into the water by an invisible hand from the lake of blood. That scene, in the current version of the play, had been removed. I looked at Michael. "What are you trying to say?" He took a deep breath. "I believe Margot Bellamy's death is connected to the script. She was in love with Henry Beaumont. They fought the night before the premiere. Some said he changed the ending at the last minute without telling her. And she really died. No one ever found her body, but..." Michael stared at me. "If her spirit is still trapped in the play, maybe we've awakened something we never should have touched." That night, I had a strange dream. I was standing in the middle of a lake, my white dress clinging to my skin, heavy and soaked. It was raining. Thunder roared. The surface of the lake was still as glass. But beneath it, I knew something was waiting. I heard a voice from the water. "Emily." A woman's voice, trembling, hoarse, as if spoken from a throat drowned too long. "Take my place." I jolted awake, drenched in sweat. But what terrified me wasn't the dream. It was the white dress I wore in it, now lying neatly on the chair beside my bed. I didn't return to the theater for the next 2 days. But Michael called. His voice didn't sound like usual. Urgent, anxious. "Gwen is missing," he said. "Last time anyone saw her was in the dressing room after rehearsal." I went silent. Another one. "Did the police check the security cameras?" They did. But something strange happened. The footage glitched right when she entered the room. And there's one frame showing a second figure behind her, but no one remembers anyone else being there. I gasped. "White dress?" He didn't answer. That night I went back to the theater. Unannounced. I had to see for myself. Had to know I wasn't going crazy. But when I arrived, the lights were still on. The doors were open. And the stage wasn't empty. Someone was standing on it, in the dim light, bathed in a faint, golden glow from the balcony above. It was Jack. He was performing a monologue, as if an audience was watching. I could hear the lines. But they weren't from our script. They were the old lines, from the handwritten version. "I waited for you beneath the lake. I called, but you didn't answer. Why did you abandon me?" Jack's voice echoed powerfully, but his eyes were vacant, as if he wasn't fully there. I stepped onto the stage, gripping my script tightly. "Jack," I called softly. He turned to look at me. His eyes were bloodshot, empty like a wooden doll's. And then behind him, the figure in the white dress appeared again. I screamed. I fled the stage, lost in the maze of backstage corridors. The wings were pitch black, the hallway twisted like a labyrinth. I heard footsteps behind me, light, steady, relentless. Not running, just walking. But every time I stopped, the steps continued, closer. A door at the end of the hallway flew open. I stepped inside, an old dressing room. Large mirrors framed with dusty yellow bulbs reflected countless images of me. And one more. In the mirror, behind me. She was there, not moving, not breathing. But her eyes were staring right at me. I don't remember how I escaped. Only that when I got home, the handwritten script was in my bag, and one page had been marked. The last line read, "The final performance, the final actor, and the blood will return to the lake." I don't know what brought me back to the theater. Maybe it was the script lying in my bag. Maybe it was the empty look in Jack's eyes that night. Or maybe it was her, the shadow in the mirror, and the whisper that haunted every single dream I had. Final night, final actor, and the blood will return to the lake. I couldn't forget that sentence. Not because the handwriting was trembling and rushed like it had been scrawled onto damp paper, but because it felt like a prophecy or a curse. I tried to burn it the next morning, but the paper wouldn't catch fire. I swear, I held the lighter to it 3 times. Each time, the flame sparked, then instantly vanished. The page remained unscathed. That entire day, I received a flurry of messages from the crew. Gwen was still missing. Jack wasn't answering his phone. Lucas had officially quit due to mental health reasons. That left just me and Michael. I decided to see him one last time, to tell him I was done. I couldn't go on. I didn't want to be the next in this deadly game. But Michael wasn't home. His apartment was on the 4th floor of an aging building on 17th Street. The door wasn't locked. I hesitated, then slowly pushed it open. The apartment was pitch dark, save for the flickering light of a small TV stuck on static. A VHS tape was playing, but there was no image. I called his name. No response. The living room was in chaos. Papers scattered, old photographs strewn about. A cracked mirror covered by a black sheet, and on the coffee table lay the original script of Lady of the Lake, torn in half. I spotted more handwritten pages, journal entries. She comes to me in dreams every night, sitting at the edge of my bed, never speaking, just watching. Her eyes are empty, but bottomless. There's something in them, something I dare not look at for too long. If I don't let Emily perform, she won't leave. But if I let her, she'll die like Margot. I collapsed to the floor, my head spinning. Michael knew. He'd known from the start. He chose me because I looked like Margot, because he believed I could finish what she started. Suddenly, the bedroom door creaked open. I snapped my head toward it. No one was there. But on the floor, wet footprints. I fled in panic, but I didn't go home. I went to the only place where I knew the answers awaited. Orpheum Theatre. By the time I arrived, night had fallen. Rain pelted the streets like icy fingers. The steel back door, leading to the tech room, was ajar. Inside, no one. But the dressing room lights were on. I stepped in, heart pounding like a war drum. And there, on the vanity table, was a round mirror. A mirror I knew had shattered last week, now fully intact. And in the mirror was Margot. There was no doubt. That face, half living, half decayed, stared straight at me. She didn't speak, but I understood. She didn't want to leave. She couldn't. The play wasn't finished. And I, the one who looked just like her, had to be the one to end it. Suddenly, every light in the theater flared on. One by one, stage lights burst to life, illuminating the vast, empty space. And then, a voice boomed from the old intercom. Act 1. Begin. I staggered onto the stage. No one in the seats, but I could feel them. Eyes. Thousands of invisible stares, following my every step. The script slipped from my hands, but the words poured from my mouth, as if I wasn't in control anymore. I walked through the mist, crossed the deepest lake, just to find your eyes again. My voice rang clear. Not a tremble, not a missed line. I wasn't acting anymore. I was living the play. And then Jack appeared. From behind the curtains he stepped out, his eyes hollow, his skin pale. He wore an old-fashioned suit, straight from the 1950s, not rehearsal gear, costume. Henry Beaumont's costume, the director from the original production. He wasn't Jack anymore. His voice was low, distant, like it rose from underground. Margot, why did you betray me? I stepped back. Jack, what the hell are you talking about? He didn't answer. He stepped forward, trembling hand reaching out, and seized my wrist. Into the lake, Margot. You must go into the water. I struggled. I'm not Margot, but he didn't listen, or couldn't. And then the floor beneath me shifted. Again, the trapdoor. The same one I'd seen before. The one that led to water. But this time, it wasn't just water. There were bodies. I screamed. Bodies surfaced, barely visible beneath the surface. Their eyes wide, mouths agape, arms outstretched, as if trying to pull me under. Gwen. Lucas, a man I didn't recognize. Perhaps a victim from 1950. And in the center was Margot. Her eyes wide open, hair flowing like black threads in the water. She smiled at me, and then a freezing hand grabbed my ankle. I don't remember how I fought free, only that something or someone pushed me back from the edge just in time. When I looked up, the stage was empty again. Jack had vanished. The lights had gone out. The theater was dark once more. I crawled out, soaking wet, mind reeling, when the police arrived after a panicked call I barely remembered making. They found Gwen's body in the props room, stuffed behind a false brick wall, and the body of an unidentified man. Beneath the stage, I never performed again. I left New York 3 days later. No goodbyes. I heard the play was cancelled. The Orpheum Theatre closed for investigation, but I knew that wouldn't change a thing. Margot's spirit was still there, waiting for someone new, an actor, a victim, an ending. 3 years. 3 years since I fled New York. 3 years running from nightmares and a horror I couldn't explain. The story of the Orpheum Theatre, of Margot, of the Lake of Death, had all faded into the past. Or so I thought. I rebuilt my life. Moved to a small town, worked in a library, lived quietly, far from the chaos I once knew. And I believed I'd escaped it all. But sometimes, the past refuses to let go. That day, I received a small package from New York. No sender name. Just a thick envelope containing a vintage fountain pen and a card. The card read in handwritten script, "Thank you for finishing the play." The signature below, Henry Beaumont. I quickly opened the pen, and an old photo slipped out. A faded black and white picture. A group of actors standing on a stage in 1950s costumes. And in the far right corner, I saw her. Margot, but I saw something else too. The man standing beside her was me. I gasped, heart racing. No, it couldn't be. But it was. The hair, the eyes, the face. It was me. But how? I'd never been there in that time. And suddenly everything came rushing back. The memories I had buried, the lake, Margot, and Michael. I remembered our last conversation. The words he never got to finish. She comes to me in dreams. Every night, she's dead, but... Now I understood. Margot's spirit wasn't just a leftover ghost. She wasn't just a haunting from a forgotten play. She was a part of me. What I believed to be the past was not a line, but a loop. I was the next chapter, just as Margot had been before me. She had been pulled into the cursed performance. And now it was my turn. And Michael, he wasn't just a director. He was the key holder, the orchestrator of the eternal play. He lured lost souls back. Unfinished fates, trapped in repetition, performing again and again. That's why I saw my reflection in the mirror. Why I felt that strange pull every time I stood on a stage. Why I looked so much like Margot. I wasn't the only one. There were many of us, haunted actors bound to a never-ending tragedy. Each time a role was left unfinished, a soul would be trapped, and the deadly cycle would begin again. The next morning, I went to an old bookstore, searching for the copy of Lady of the Lake I'd thrown away. But I didn't find it. Instead, I found a new one, bound in black, no author listed. I opened it. The first page read, "Thank you for finishing the play." In that moment, I no longer doubted. Margot's spirit or mine. We were not victims. We were the play itself, and no one could ever escape, not even me. That night, I stood before a ruined, crumbling theater. Nothing left but broken walls. But I knew, inside that stage, I would stand again. Step out, perform once more. I had no choice, because I am Margot, and I will act until the loop ends. Thank you for finishing the play. And if you ever visit that theater, don't look for me backstage. Look in the mirror. You'll see me, just like I once saw her, Margot, and me. And after that, you won't escape either. Story 5. The Burned Alive One. I never believed in ghosts until I set foot in Claridge, Kentucky. It all began with a simple email from the local police department asking our team of paranormal investigators to help uncover the truth behind a series of strange events in an old house at the end of Sable Ridge Street. I'm Lucas Grant, and together with my two colleagues, Naomi and Felix, we've investigated dozens of haunted locations. From an abandoned orphanage in New Orleans to the shadowy Red Hook forests of Maine. But nothing had ever sent a chill through my bones quite like this place. House number 46 on Sable Ridge wasn't particularly large, but there was something suffocating about it. An oppressive gloom that seemed to weigh down the air. The roof tiles were rotting, weeds reached knee-high, and the pale gray-white walls were stained with black streaks like smoke. But no one in town could recall the last time there was a fire. We arrived around 5 p.m., just as the sun was setting behind the trees to the west. A wiry sheriff named Rick Nolan was already waiting at the gate, his tense expression suggesting he had no intention of stepping even 1 foot closer to the house. Mrs. Whitmore, the previous tenant, said that every night at exactly 1:12 a.m., the screaming begins again, Rick said, eyes fixed on a second-floor window, like someone's being burned alive inside. Naomi glanced at her watch and jotted notes. Felix was already unpacking the thermal camera, EMF detector, and audio recorders. I brought only my worn leather notebook, thick with notes no one dared to read. Inside, the house smelled scorched, not musty, as you'd expect from a long-abandoned building, but burnt. It was the scent of singed hair, charred flesh, and smoldering fabric, like someone had just been set on fire. There, the night before, the first floor didn't offer much. A living room with white-draped armchairs and a kitchen where scorched cracks still marred the walls. But the second floor, that's where things began. The victim's room, a 23-year-old woman named Mara Hollis, remained untouched, as if the incident had happened just yesterday. The police hadn't cleaned the scene, partly out of fear, partly because they believed her spirit hadn't left. The walls bore hand-shaped burn marks. These weren't caused by any normal fire. They looked as if Mara had tried to claw her way out. Her hands seared into the wood as she struggled. She was burned alive, While still conscious, Rick murmured, "And it looks like she locked the door from the inside." We camped out on the first floor, waiting for midnight. Audio recorders were placed throughout the house, and infrared cameras began recording. Naomi monitored signals from her laptop, while Felix and I double-checked all entry points to ensure no one could sneak in. Then, 1:12 a.m., a sound. It started with the creak of old floorboards, then slowly shifted into soft sobbing. No one said a word. Naomi met my gaze, mouthing, "She's crying." The sobs didn't last a full minute before they abruptly stopped. A faint mist began drifting down the staircase from the second floor, thick, black, and clinging to the air like oily fog. Felix raised his flashlight, but its beam only reached a few feet before dimming into nothing. In that murky darkness, I swear I saw a figure. Faceless, tangled hair, standing on the 5th step from the top. I shouted, but the figure vanished in a single heartbeat. The next morning, Rick handed us the case files. Curiously, all of Mara's personal journals had gone missing, except for one charred page with a rushed scrawl at the bottom. "I know who he is, but I can't leave this place until someone knows the truth." We dug deeper into the town's history. Turns out, over the past 10 years, there had been 3 similar fires. All the victims were young women. All lived alone. All died at night. The official cause in every case? Electrical faults? Yet no physical evidence of foul play was ever found. Until Mara's death. That's when the pieces began to align. Felix discovered something suspicious. In all 4 incidents, the first person to arrive at the scene was the same man, Dean Gallows, a local handyman in his 40s, lived alone, a prior domestic violence record, but had always managed to avoid charges. The question was, how did Mara know Dean was the killer? And if she did, why was she the one who got burned alive? In her own room, that afternoon, we went to find Dean. He lived in a mobile home near the pine woods south of Claridge. When I asked about Mara, Dean only smiled, eyes glassy like dirty crystal. That girl talked too much. Naomi gripped my arm tightly. We couldn't report him without solid evidence. But Mara's spirit didn't need proof. She just needed someone to see the truth. That night, we returned to the house, but this time, the screaming didn't start at 1:12 a.m. It started at 11 p.m. The second night, we returned to the house around 10 p.m. after spending the day roaming the town, asking around about Mara's acquaintances and quietly following Dean Gallows. No one was willing to say much about him. It was like the whole story had been sealed under a thick layer of ash. Everyone knew, but no one dared to stir it up. A light drizzle fell as we pulled up to house number 46. The autumn chill in Claridge seeped into our bones, though I couldn't tell if it was from the weather or something else lurking in the air. Naomi looked at me and asked softly, "Are you sure we're safe tonight?" I didn't dare answer. Felix opened the trunk, pulling out the infrared camera and a small wooden box containing several fragments of dried bone, supposedly from the time of the indigenous tribes. He believed it could sense lost spirits. Honestly, I never put much faith in charms, but after what I saw last night, I couldn't explain it away. As we crossed the threshold, our flashlights flickered and died. No one spoke. The wind whistled through the cracks like distant whispers, and I was almost certain someone had just passed the second-floor window through the veil of rain. 11 p.m. The screaming began, not like the night before, no longer a cry of torment, but a series of guttural, rasping moans, like someone with a crushed throat trying to force out their last words. Then smoke began seeping from under the upstairs bedroom door, thick as ink, with a burnt stench that choked my lungs. Felix raised the camera, but the lens shook uncontrollably. Naomi pulled me back, whispering phrases in Latin she'd picked up from old texts. I didn't understand the words, but the spirit in that room did. She responded. Footsteps echoed from the second floor. Slow, heavy, the sound of a woman's heels striking dry wooden boards. Then, a soft laugh rang out. It sounded like Mara, exactly like her voice in the police recording. We decided to split up. Naomi and I went upstairs. Felix stayed on the ground floor to monitor signals. The staircase felt twice as long, every step like walking deeper into a waiting grave. Mara's room was the same, or almost. A new crack had appeared in the mirror above the vanity. In the faint glow from the camera, I could clearly see a fresh message written across the glass. He is watching. Naomi gently touched the mirror's surface, and suddenly the door slammed shut behind us. The lock clicked. She screamed, pounding against the door, but it wouldn't budge. I turned. Smoke was now rising from beneath the bed, and from within that smoke, a charred black hand reached out, fingers trembling as they pointed straight at me. Felix got a strange signal. He shouted through the radio, "Lucas, someone's out back. Movement detected." I tried to break the door down. Naomi turned to look at the mirror. It no longer reflected us, but instead showed a girl tied to a chair. Her mouth gagged, surrounded by flames. She strained her neck, eyes wide in horror, and suddenly turned to look straight at Naomi. The mirror shattered into hundreds of pieces. At that very moment, the door swung open, as if it had never been locked. We bolted into the hallway, coughing in the smoke, stumbling down the stairs. Felix stood in the middle of the living room, the camera at his feet, his eyes vacant. "Dean." "He was just outside," he stammered. I swear I saw him staring through the window. Then he vanished. We didn't sleep that night. Instead, we replayed the footage. In the final 27 seconds, before the mirror shattered, the camera captured a figure standing silently in the corner of Mara's room. No footsteps, no door opening. A girl, in a scorched white dress, hair covering her face, and behind her, another figure, taller, larger, a whisper barely audible through the static. "I know who he is. Don't let him leave." The next morning, Rick Nolan came to see us, his face pale, shaken. He brought an old photo from a forgotten police case file. It showed the aftermath of a fire in 2014. The victim, a girl named Lacey Givens, 9 years before Mara's death. We looked at each other, then back at the photo. Lacey and Mara looked almost identical. The same wavy hair, the same deep-set eyes. It couldn't be a coincidence. Rick told us Lacey once lived in the same house, 46 Sable Ridge. "I think," Rick's voice trembled, "this house isn't just haunted by Mara. It's haunted by many. And maybe these spirits are trying to lead us to the truth." That afternoon, Felix received an anonymous email. No name, no sender info. Attached was a single audio file titled "Voice Inside Flames." We played it. A woman's voice, weak, hoarse, like someone speaking through smoke. "It's not just one. Here's two. The killer doesn't work alone." Flames roared. Then silence. The recording ended. Naomi gripped my hand. We thought it was only Dean, but what if there's someone else? Someone behind him? Someone covering it all up? That question didn't just make us shiver. It opened a door to a far darker truth. Maybe Dean wasn't the only killer. Maybe he was just a puppet, and the one pulling the strings was someone none of us had ever suspected. I never thought that a recording, less than a minute long, could change everything I believed about the case. But ever since I heard that voice, raspy, desperate, and heavy with every word, things started to fracture. There isn't just one, there are two of them. That sentence haunted me all night. I dreamed of a room filled with smoke, two figures standing side by side, one tall and brutish, and the other whispering behind, slipping in and out of view like it had never truly existed in the light. The next morning, we left house number 46 to head to the town library. Naomi believed that if Lacey Givens and Mara had once lived in the same house, there might be other victims who'd been overlooked. Felix found an old map of Claridge, marking all the fire incidents from the past 30 years. Strangely, every fire involving young women occurred within a 3-mile radius of that house. Even stranger, each case shared one detail in common. Dean Gallows had been the electrician called in just weeks before the fire. I started getting headaches. Everything felt too connected to be mere coincidence. Naomi traced records from the state's psychiatric hospitals. She found another name, Angela Moore, who had lived at House 46 back in 1997. Angela was admitted to a psychiatric facility a few weeks after the house partially burned. Her files cited severe dissociative disorder and trauma-induced hallucinations. In her statement to police at the time, Angela said, "There's someone in the mirror. He told me to stay quiet, or I'd be burned like she was." Angela had no sister, but in her treatment journal, her doctor noted that she repeatedly spoke of someone named Lacey. We arranged to visit Angela at the Claridge Mental Rehabilitation Center, a decrepit facility nestled in a pine forest where silence hung like a curse. She was now in her 40s, her hair sparse, her eyes constantly avoiding light. Naomi was the one who spoke. "Angela," she said softly, "do you remember what happened at the Sable Ridge house?" Angela trembled, then slowly raised a finger to her lips in a shh motion. Then, in a voice barely audible, she said, "It wasn't Dean. He just did what he was told. There's someone else. Someone who told him what to do." "Who?" Naomi asked. Angela shook her head. "He has no name. He lives in the dark, in the mirror, in dreams. He never dies." Those words sent a chill straight down my spine. On the way back, none of us spoke. Each of us sunk into a silent fear, as if something had begun to follow us, not from the outside, but from within. That night, Felix discovered something strange in the security footage from Mara's room. In a clip at 2:17 a.m., a time when no one was home, a figure appeared in the mirror. There was no distinct shape, just a dark blur, as if the night itself had congealed into foam. And then, it lifted its head and stared directly at the camera. The screen instantly flickered into static. When the image returned, a message had appeared on the mirror, written in steam. "Stop digging." The next day, Rick Nolan called us to the police station. He had received a new tip, not from law enforcement, but from a priest who had lived in Claridge over 20 years ago. His name was Father Whitaker. Now retired and living in a small monastery on the outskirts of Louisville, he had left behind a letter for the police before leaving town. The letter spoke of a failed exorcism in 1995, also at house number 46. The child in the house was not insane. She was possessed, Father Whitaker wrote. And what was there wasn't just a single spirit. It was something far older, something that knows how to manipulate the living, command the dead, and hide in reflections. If it knows you're looking for it, it will begin to show itself. At the bottom of the letter was a handwritten warning. Stay away from mirrors. Never look into them alone. That night, Naomi dreamed she was standing before the mirror in our hotel bathroom. But the mirror didn't reflect her. It showed an entirely different room. Inside was a girl tied up, her eyes wide open, her lips mouthing, "Help me! She's going to burn me!" Naomi jolted awake, drenched in sweat. I walked in to find her gasping, her eyes locked onto the mirror. On its surface was a faint handprint, as if someone had pressed against it from the other side. We decided to return to the house the next day. One last time, but this time, not just to investigate. We wanted to confront it. Naomi brought a small mirror, its surface completely sealed with red cloth. She believed it could act as a portal to trap the entity haunting the house. If it truly existed, Felix and I brought cameras, UV lights, and an old Bible borrowed from the local church. We entered the house at 11:11 p.m. The air inside was thick, like a poisonous fog clinging to our skin. The moment Felix set up the camera, the lights began to flicker, then died. I shone my flashlight, and the first thing I saw was a pair of eyes, glowing red, peering through the upstairs doorway. I rushed up. Naomi followed. Mara's room door was wide open. The mirror that had shattered the previous night was now intact again, but it no longer reflected the room. Instead, it showed a smoke-filled torture chamber where someone was being burned. Skin flaying off layer by layer. And then the shadow appeared, over 7 feet tall, no face, just a void leaking blood. It didn't walk. It crawled across the floor. Every time it moved, the wooden boards beneath cracked, as if burning from the inside. Naomi screamed, holding the red-covered mirror up toward it. "In nomine Patris," she cried. A screech burst forth, an agonized howl composed of hundreds of voices at once. Wind spiraled through the room, flinging everything around. The mirror in Naomi's hand shattered, but not outward. It shattered inward. Something had been sucked inside. The screaming stopped. The house fell silent. We left at 2 a.m. No one spoke a word, but we all knew it wasn't over. Felix received a blank message. No sender, no content, just a single flame emoji. And the next morning, Rick Nolan vanished from Clay Ridge. The next day we returned to 46 Sable Ridge, though the strange images from the previous night still haunted my mind. At this point, none of us could deny that something, unexplainable and looming, was hiding in the shadows. But what frightened me wasn't just the phenomena themselves. It was the sudden disappearance of Sheriff Rick Nolan. It all started with a phone call early that morning. Naomi's phone rang, and when she answered, the hoarse voice of the officer on the other end sent a chill straight through us. "Sheriff Rick, he's not home. He didn't come back last night. No one's seen him. No one can reach him." We didn't need more explanation. A creeping dread settled in, and none of us had to speak aloud. We all knew what was coming next. We rushed to the police station. The door to the sheriff's office remained shut. A young officer named Bobby stood outside, clutching his phone, his face pale and uncertain. I can't find him. His wife says he never came home. Something's really wrong. Felix stepped closer, peering through the small window. In the dim glow of the desk lamp, he saw Rick's work still unfinished, papers scattered across the desk. But there was something else. A photograph, tossed carelessly on the floor. It was an old photo of Mara Hollis, but she wasn't alone in it. Next to her, Dean Gallows, the electrician we'd long suspected. "Why would this be here?" Naomi asked, her voice tinged with unease. Bobby bent down, picked up the photo, and handed it to us. "I don't know. It doesn't seem to belong to any of the case files in the office." There was no time to speculate further. One thing was clear. Rick had discovered something. He'd been digging deeper into the strange events plaguing this town. And now, he was gone. Vanished without a trace. That night, we made the decision to return to the house. The darkness that lingered inside had scarred us. But at this point, there was no turning back. We had to uncover the truth before it was too late. By the time we reached the creaking gate, night had fully fallen. The air felt thick, like it was pressing in on us with every step we took toward the house. A strange heaviness gripped the atmosphere, and with each footstep I felt as if some invisible force grew stronger and closer. Naomi whispered under her breath, "Maybe we shouldn't have come back." I glanced at her, and the worry in her eyes mirrored my own. I understood. No one had slept since that first night. We couldn't shake the nightmares, but walking away wasn't an option anymore. Rick was missing, and if our suspicions were right, Dean Gallows wasn't the only monster in this story. We entered without another word. Exhaustion and tension weighed us down. Felix brought his camera and a high-powered light. Naomi sifted through our collected notes and case files. I sat down, trying to piece together the fragments, but the more I thought, the more tangled my thoughts became. Then, in a moment of silence, a floorboard creaked from the second floor. Naomi and Felix locked eyes. We knew that sound too well. It was the sound of footsteps moving just out of sight. I stood and moved toward the staircase. Felix's camera light flickered as it followed me, catching every dust-laced step. But the moment I reached the third step, a door creaked open, on its own. It was Mara's room. Again. This time, there were no screams, no smoke, no flickering spirits, just silence. I stepped inside, and for the first time, I felt something. A presence. Not just eerie, but alive, watching. Suddenly, Felix's camera blinked to life, and on the screen appeared a blurry shape, a figure, in the mirror. But it wasn't Mara. It wasn't a ghost. It was a man, Dean Gallows, his eyes bloodshot, his mouth twisted in a grotesque grin. "He's here," Felix whispered, eyes fixed on the screen. "He's in the mirror." But something was wrong. The reflection wasn't moving naturally. It jerked, shifted, like a puppet controlled by something else. Like it wasn't really him, but something wearing his image. Then suddenly, my flashlight died. The room plunged into darkness. Only one sound remained. Laughter, cold and inhuman, and then a whisper. "The fire will rise again." In an instant, the room exploded in red light. not from any bulb or device. This was otherworldly, hellish. Flames flickered from nowhere, illuminating the space like a burning cathedral. My vision blurred. I could feel something, or someone, pulling me into the fire, into memories I couldn't escape. We bolted from the house. Rick's words echoed in my head, along with Father Whitaker's warnings. But just as we reached the door to shut it behind us, a sound from upstairs. The door slammed shut, and the screaming began again. But this time, it wasn't Mara's voice. It was Sheriff Rick Nolan. A cold wind blew through the cracks in the door as we fled the house. No one said a word. No one dared to look at each other. Only the sound of frantic footsteps echoed as we ran past the gate, through the yard, and toward the car. It felt like something was chasing us. But when I turned back, there was no one there. The door of House 46 shut behind us, but the screams of Sheriff Rick Nolan still rang in my mind. It wasn't the scream of a living person. It sounded like the cry of a soul burning in fire. And I couldn't shake the feeling that Rick had become part of something dark, invisible, yet horrifyingly real. We sat in the car in silence. Thoughts swirled chaotically in my head. Why was Rick there? Why did we see Dean Gallows in the mirror? And most importantly, why did his shadow smile at us like that? Those questions looped endlessly in my mind, and I felt like I was being drawn into a cycle with no escape. The next day, Naomi and I returned to see Bobby, the young officer we'd met before. He looked more confused than ever. We still had no idea where Rick was, and the town seemed to have fallen into some strange spiral where everyone felt distant and uneasy. But Bobby had something that caught my attention. A short video clip sent to his phone that morning. A clip we couldn't explain. The footage showed Sheriff Rick standing in front of House 46. He just stood there in silence, his eyes blank as if he were waiting for something. But what was strange, thick smoke began to billow behind him, enveloping the house like an unquenchable fire. Rick didn't move, didn't react. He stood like he was being drawn into something. Then, from the upstairs window, the black figure we had seen in the mirror the night before emerged. It wasn't human, just a dense, shifting mass of darkness. When the video ended, I could barely breathe. "I think we need to go back to the house," Bobby said, his voice tense. "Something's happening, and I don't know how to stop it." We couldn't wait any longer. Naomi and I drove back to the house. Felix didn't come. He couldn't handle the tension anymore. And I understood. From the moment we arrived in Claridge, the house had cast a suffocating presence over us. Every step inside felt like we were being watched, an invisible thread tying everything together. But when we arrived, there was no smoke, no sign of the dark figure. The house stood still, almost lifeless. "Maybe we're wrong," Naomi said softly. "Maybe this isn't the place. Maybe Rick never left town. But he entered something we can't understand." I didn't know what to say, but one thing I was certain of. If we didn't return, if we didn't keep searching for the truth, more people would suffer. And Rick, maybe he was still inside that darkness, murdered by a force none of us could comprehend. Stepping into the house again, the air in the living room was frigid. Everything felt different from the last time. The paintings on the walls seemed to shift slightly, their subjects' eyes following us wherever we moved. The old fabric-covered chairs gave off an oppressive air, as though daring anyone to sit. Naomi held the flashlight and pointed it up the stairs. We climbed in silence. Our footsteps echoed throughout the house. No reply came. The second floor was where we had seen the shattered mirror, where we'd found Dean's image in the black fog. Inside Mara's bedroom, something strange caught my eye. The mirror was no longer broken. It had been placed exactly where it was before. But now a cloudy film covered the glass, obscuring anything behind it. Naomi stepped closer, then stopped. She touched the surface, gently wiping the haze. Fear crept up inside me, but before I could warn her, the mirror began to change. At first, only swirling smoke, then a figure appeared, Sheriff Rick, his face pale, lips sealed, eyes hollow as he stared into us. No sign of life. "Help me." Rick's voice echoed, but not from his mouth. It came from within the mirror itself, as if traveling from some faraway place. Another world. "Help me, before I become part of it." Naomi stepped back, eyes still fixed on the glass. She didn't understand what was happening, but I did. It was a warning. Suddenly, the mirror shattered, not by our hands, but by some invisible force. The shards flew across the room. Before we could even react, as the pieces hit the floor, they didn't sound like glass. They sounded like fire. Then, without warning, a red light fled up from beneath the floorboards, illuminating the entire room. But this wasn't normal light. It was a deep, fiery red, radiating intense, almost unbearable heat. That black figure, the one we had seen in the mirror, appeared again. Not through the mirror, but now, within that red glow. It stepped out of the shadows, its eyes glowing like coals. It stared at us without saying a word. It didn't need to speak. This was the thing that made Sheriff Rick vanish. And now, it was hunting for more souls. Darkness blanketed the room. Not the kind that comes with night, but something deeper. Something born from a feeling I couldn't put into words. A strange silence settled. No wind, no sounds. Only the faint red glow from the shattered mirror, spreading like a smoldering flame, quietly devouring everything around it. We stood frozen, not daring to move. Our eyes locked on the black shadow slowly approaching us. It had no clear shape, but everything in the room seemed to be drawn toward it, as if pulled by an invisible force. Each of its steps felt like the beat of a heart, heavy, slow, deliberate. Naomi said nothing. She just stared at the darkness, her body tense like a stretched wire, clutching the bag of exorcism tools we had brought. Felix stood beside her, hands trembling as he held the camera, too afraid to turn it on, as if filming it would trigger something dangerous. I didn't even dare to breathe too loudly. I knew, if we made one wrong move, that shadow would sense us. And whatever happened next, I didn't want to imagine. Then came a small sound, barely a whisper, but enough to make me jolt. It was the creak of the window at the far end of the room, opening inch by inch, as if someone was trying to step inside. A figure appeared at the window. At first, it was just a faint outline. But then, it became unmistakably clear. It was Sheriff Rick Nolan. But not the Rick we had known. He was no longer human. His form was distorted, his body charred and burned, his face disfigured by deep scars. His eyes were empty, void of life. His lips moved, but no sound came out. I couldn't move. My eyes couldn't leave him. I felt like Rick was pulling me into another world, one where everything we understood about death was twisted and reversed. Naomi stood up, hands trembling. "We have to go. Right now," she whispered, her voice choking with fear. But as she turned to run, The shadow from the mirror lashed out, lightning fast, and blocked the doorway. For the first time, I felt the true weight of its pull, a force that rooted us to the floor. The shadow was controlling the space around us. It wanted us to stay. Naomi screamed. She lunged toward the door, but the moment she touched it, a deafening roar erupted, as if the entire house were being crushed by some monstrous force. Behind us, the wall cracked open, and black smoke began to pour from the gaps, choking the air. In that moment, I felt something strange. Time seemed to stop. The shadow froze, its glowing red eyes staring directly at us. No words, just a gaze, cold, merciless, eternal. Then Rick appeared again, this time not at the window, but standing directly in front of me. He was no longer a man, but a ghost, half his body charred and broken. His mouth moved again, and this time I heard him whisper, "Save me, before I become part of it." A shift swept through the room. Everything began to collapse. And then, shadow from the mirror began to split, fracturing into thousands of smaller shapes, like lost souls rising from the darkness itself. Naomi dashed toward the window, no longer caring about what was happening around her. She opened it, but the moment she did, thick clouds of smoke surged in, knocking her to the floor. I turned around, nearly suffocating, and in the shadows, I saw another figure, Dean Gallows. He stood there, his eyes filled with cruel amusement, as if he had orchestrated everything. I wanted to charge at him, but my body wouldn't respond. The souls around me were binding me in place. A coldness rose from the floorboards, seeping into my skin step by step. Dean's shadow faded, and now, I couldn't even tell if it was him anymore. It hit me then. Dean Gallows wasn't the one behind all of this. He was merely a pawn in something far older, something that had been lurking for ages, manipulating anyone foolish enough to get close. Suddenly, the light in the room flickered and died. Everything was swallowed by darkness. But this wasn't normal darkness. It lived. It had weight, power, intention. I didn't know what to do. I felt like I was being pulled into a bottomless pit with no way to escape. And then, Mara's voice echoed beside me. Not from the mirror, from right beside me. "Help me. Help me escape this darkness." For the first time, I truly heard the despair in her voice. It wasn't a scream. It was a soft, broken plea. The agony of a soul completely lost, unable to find the way back. At that moment, I did the one thing none of us had considered. I ran into the darkness. No hesitation, no looking back, no fear. My eyes saw nothing but black. And then, a sudden wave of heat surged through me, like fire licking at my soul, threatening to burn it to ash. When everything stopped, I woke up, slumped on the floor. Naomi and Felix were gone, the final pieces of the story. Now it was just me, and the darkness that refused to let go.